Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Casen.
This is our final episode of our Final Fantasy VIII analysis series. There is a lot to get through. I mean, a lot. So we're not going to waste any freaking time today.
All right.
But there is one thing we have to talk about before we get started, and that is that a lot of people are going to be interested in what are you doing after Final Fantasy VIII. This is our last episode, so what's coming next? We are conducting a poll, a vote, right now on our Patreon and Subscribestar pages. So if you're not aware of those pages and how they work, anybody, doesn't matter what level you are supporting at, gets an extra podcast. There's an exclusive podcast episode that goes up there.
Every month.
Yeah, as well as a live stream, a Final Fantasy Friday live stream, just for those supporters. But at the $5 level, the whole sort of premise of that tier is that you get to lend your voice to the channel. So if you're at that level, you'll be voting on which games that we cover next, and you'll be able to submit questions for that exclusive podcast. So that vote is already underway, and at the moment, we are neck and neck between Nier, with Nier Replicant coming out here at the end of the month, end of April. That's one game that's current or relevant that we wanted to talk about. Or Mass Effect, which is having a trilogy remaster that comes out just a couple weeks after that. So we're not going to be including any Final Fantasy games on this poll, because if we include a Final Fantasy game on any poll, it will always win.
We don't even need to do the poll.
There's no reason to do a poll if there's a Final Fantasy game on that poll.
Yeah.
And we don't want this to be exclusively a Final Fantasy podcast. So we're going to include a Final Fantasy game, probably pit two Final Fantasy games against each other every other poll.
Yeah.
So on this one, it's looking like it's going to be either Mass Effect or Nier, and if you want to vote, we're going to leave that poll up for another week once this goes live. To the end of the week, I should say. So by Friday this week, I will announce a winner, and then we'll begin working on the first episode for either Nier or Mass Effect, most likely. And then on the next poll, once that game is finished, we will do probably Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy VI. We'll pit them up, just the two against each other, and see which one comes out on top.
Which one?
There have been a lot of people who've been saying, please do this with Final Fantasy X. I've been wanting to replay Final Fantasy X.
And that was one that we kind of thought of doing instead of 8.
Yeah.
10 was on the list, but we chose 8 instead. So
yeah,
we wanted to do it.
So anyways, hopefully that answers your questions. Again, and if you'd like to support us, if you've enjoyed this podcast, check out our Patreon page or Subscribestar page if you're not into Patreon. Both of those links are in the description. But let's get started here. So,
all right.
Last time, a lot of people were worried that we had skipped over the scene in the flower field between Squall and Rinoa, because in the chronology, or as the game actually happens, that happens first before you go back to Esthar. And, well, before you go back to Esthar and find out that Laguna is the president of Galbadia. Oh, right. So before that scene, but I skipped it on purpose because we have a hard time limit of about 2 hours and 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Once that time limit is reached, we have no more room on the memory cards and we can't keep recording. And I knew there was so much about this scene that we were going to need to talk about that we could not possibly have done it in our time limit last week. Yeah. So we're going to start here. So after you have rescued Rinoa from the Sorceress's memorial, right? They have their scene where they fall into each other's arms and they've reunited and they take her back in the party. The game really kind of opens up again there to where there's a lot of side quests you can do.
Well, and that's when you can go back into the ship, and then you're flying the Ragnarok around, and you can kind of go anywhere with that, even more so than with the the garden. Right.
So, anyways, but the next story beat happens when you go back to the orphanage in Central. And when you arrive there, there's a scene between Squall and Rinoa. If she's not in your party, the other characters in your party, you kind of enter and then you just turn to the left really quick, and there's a big flower field out there. Actually, it's kind of easy to miss.
It's easy to miss. I was just about to say that.
If you've been there, in the previous part of the game where you come to the orphanage, it can be easy to miss this flower field screen.
It kind of doesn't seem like it would fit, that it ought to be there in general. That
Because
just right to the left
Centra
here
is
a
really,
massive
because
flower field.
all of the entire continent of Centra is like a wasteland.
And not only that, but you're kind of going up against the coastline here with the orphanage, and so if it just feels like there isn't going to be much.
Right.
But there is.
But this flower field is the same from the opening FMV sequence of the game, and the scene that happens here. Once you arrive there, the other characters will say, "Oh, don't you want to talk to Rinoa alone?" And so they'll kind of leave and get her to come, or if she's in your party, she'll be there already. But whatever. The point is, there's a moment for Squall and Rinoa to talk alone in this flower field, and this is the scene which was being foreshadowed in the opening FMV sequence.
Yeah.
Now, of all the things, of all the criticisms, we've had plenty of criticism, plenty of praise over these 10 hours of talking about Final Fantasy VIII. I would say the thing that people have come back at me the hardest on is the opening FMV sequence.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's a good hook for the story, whatever. So I'm gonna preface everything I say here with this. Obviously, it works to a large degree with a lot of people.
Right.
So I'm not trying to suggest, like, my view on whatever changes or whether the game should have started here or not is anything other than just, maybe like a minority opinion or something like that.
Right.
But it's just my thoughts on it. And obviously it was emotionally resonant. It worked for a lot of people. So I'm not trying to say this thing sucks and it's a piece of crap. I hope that we've made it clear that we thought it was...
It's beautiful. It's well done.
Exactly.
In for what it is. It's very well done. Like, it looks nice, and the sound, music, and everything, and it's a beautiful piece of art.
Yes. Okay. So hopefully we've made that clear enough.
But now we're going to try and fit it into the story, and that's where it's a little more difficult. But still.
So the scene that happens here, let's just go over that first. Squall and Rinoa are talking to each other, and essentially this boils down to them discussing fears about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And Squall making a promise to her, right, that he's going to be here waiting for her no matter what. If you get lost, if something happens, you can return here to this spot, this flower field, and I will be here waiting for you.
And she kind of reciprocates and says, "Hey, me too.
Right.
If you ever get lost, this is where I'll be."
And where he more or less swears to be her knight if she becomes the sorceress.
Yes. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So she's concerned about what if Ultimecia takes control of me? What if the sorceress's powers come back? And he's like, I am going to be your knight in that case. So it's a really sweet little scene. I think overall it's one that lands pretty well for me, which is interesting because in the opening FMV I criticized the way some of the dialogue is written. However, and this is going to slam home part of my point that I made before. So the scene is great, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more. The scene
itself, very
like the flower field scene. Their discussion is a great scene. I really like it. And what comes right after that, when you go back and then Idea comes out and she talks to you for a minute, and you can go talk to her and sit a little bit. She elaborates on the whole sorceress's knight role.
Right.
And that's really great too. So the way that they pull this whole scene together, I like everything about it. I think it's great. But I need to comment on how this ties into the opening FMV and make a couple of extra points to kind of clarify why I felt the way I did. Before I do that though, do you want to say anything about that scene? Did anything stick out to you there?
No, I mean, we kind of went over the basics, and let's hear it.
Okay. So I talked a little bit about the use of ellipses, which is the dots, the overuse of ellipses in the opening FMV, right? So in the intro version, I'll put the text on screen so you guys can see it too up here, right? What I'm reading. In the opening FMV version of some of this dialogue, it reads, "I'll be here, ... right? Ellipses, right? Then the question, why, ... question mark. I'll be waiting. Waiting is in quotations for some reason.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know why it's in quotations, but the word waiting is in quotations. Then there's an ellipses, ... here, ... again. Then then the question, for what? And then the answer, I'll be waiting, ... for you, ... so, ... again. If you come here, ... you'll find me, I promise. There is an incredible oversaturation or overuse of ellipses.
Right.
Now, what is the purpose of an ellipses in a sentence? It is to signify a pause, a break, a hesitation,
right.
maybe sort of like a dramatic pause,
right.
a beat. In a
a
film script or something,
right, yeah.
they would write the words a beat, to signify that you need to pause here before you move on to the next.
Let it sink in. Yeah.
Right. Usually for dramatic effect.
Yes.
We established that Tetsuya Nomura directed the opening FMV.
Yeah.
Kitase says that was a product of Tetsuya Nomura, completely a product of Tetsuya Nomura. He did that. Okay? Now I want you to look at the same dialogue within the context of the scene as it actually plays out. So not in the opening FMV. So the first two lines are the same. The I'll be here, ... and then the ... why, right? Then there's a line in between those. The reason you couldn't find me was because we haven't promised yet. And she says, promised, ... And then he goes on to say, I'll be waiting for you. If you come here, you'll find me, I promise. None of that. None of that has any ellipses in it. So again, to contrast, the first two lines are the same, so we'll set that aside. There's a dramatic pause as they're sitting here saying, I'll be waiting. Well, why would you be waiting for me? Sure. So there's a little bit of a beat in between those lines, right? The first one, the intro version is, I'll be waiting here. Then a second question, for what? Which is not in this one. I'll be waiting, repeated again, for you. So, if you come here, you'll find me, I promise.
That sounds almost like echoes.
Yes.
Like you're hearing a voice on the wind, but you can't quite decipher it.
And maybe that was Nomura's intention because it is kind of dreamlike.
Yeah, it seems very flowy. Like
the opening FMV is kind of abstract and kind of dreamy. So maybe it is meant to sound, because they didn't record lines, there's no voice acting.
Exactly, so we don't know exactly how those
So maybe it's meant to come across like this almost dreamlike, mysterious voice, like on the wind almost. Maybe that's the intention.
And if the way he chose to do that was to just put ... then that may not have been the best way to do it. But I don't know exactly how you would do it.
I could see that being the reason why.
Yeah.
But in the version that's in context, he doesn't say I'll be waiting 3 times like that. He only says it once. I'll be waiting. I'll be here. The reason you couldn't find me is because we haven't promised yet. I'll be waiting for you. If you come here, you'll find me, I promise. And it's written pretty straightforward. So I guess just to kind of elaborate on the point that I was making as it comes off as being a bit melodramatic or over-dramatic to me in the intro sequence, it is because of this use of ellipses and this repetition of using the same words 3 times. Without context or without alluding to what you're talking about. Right?
And he does the same kind of thing in Kingdom Hearts. At the beginning of those. Where Sora thinking, I've been having these weird thoughts lately, ... and they'd use the ... dots kind of similar, except it is voice acted.
Yeah.
Well, maybe parts of it aren't, though, because sometimes there is text on screen, but parts of it are, and then he's able to kind of convey that in a different way.
Sure.
But it's a similar kind of thing, and I think it is supposed to be dreamlike. And also the whole idea of editing a montage style like that, where you're cutting things that don't make sense against different backdrops, the juxtaposition makes me feel like it is supposed to be a dream. Not only that, at the end of it, Squall wakes up, right? So it's clearly meant to be a dream. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
Okay, so anyways, the fact that the repetition of things that were not necessarily in the in-context version, the just total overuse of ellipses, are part of why that dialogue reads in that sort of melodramatic, kind of corny way to me in the intro sequence. And it's interesting to me that it does not read that way in the actual script when they get to the scene.
I think that's very interesting.
So that's one
Which
part.
means that an artistic decision was made to separate the words out a lot early on in the intro. And, well, I don't know, because one of the things that we're doing here when we analyze the story is we're not, we're trying to figure out why they did what they did.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to figure out why they did what they did.
Yes.
Like in this case. Because the text exists, but it's different.
Yeah. I mean, that should be the point. Or I think it's important to consider that. Like, rather than just saying, oh, I didn't like this because I don't like it. It's like, well, why did they do that? And then if you can kind of discover the process behind why, and then consider the scene with that in mind, it's like, oh, okay.
It can be more valuable.
It can change your perspective on it, right?
But that's assuming you can find out why.
Figure it out in the first place. But, so that was one part of the reason why I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the presentation or the style, because the whole discussion in that first episode was about style, right?
Yeah.
I'm not in love with Nomura's style and with Kitase's style. No, I'm not talking about substance or talking about like content itself. I'm talking about the style of the presentation. And this is a great example of how you take one thing and you change the style of how it's presented, and it changes how it lands. Yeah. Right?
Yep.
So that's one part of it. The other part of it, and this is where I kind of want to transition into talking about like, what is the opening in FMV sequence setting up? What is it foreshadowing? What is it meant? What mysteries is it trying to establish, right? I think it's really, really important thematically that this scene be included in that opening FMV. If we're, okay, sorry, let me start here actually. So I said that I thought a better hook or opening for the story would be the Dalit mission.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
To some degree, I still hold to that, but I want to now go back and say that I think that there are just a couple, like not even that many, small tweaks that they could have made to the opening cinematic that would have made it a really effective opening hook. So now that I've said that part, diving into, okay, what is the thematic core of Final Fantasy VIII? What is it that the story is trying to say? What is it leading into? We talked about, I think in episode 2, that the kind of the core theme of Final Fantasy VIII is how long can a person get by with the attitude of Squall, of everyone needs to take care of themselves, I don't need help from other people, I can become strong, dismissing, letting others into your heart. How long can you get by with an attitude like that? And once you finally fall in love with somebody, how does that person deal with those issues internally?
Yep.
That's what Final Fantasy VIII is about.
Sure.
And it's all incorporated in his resentment of his role of leadership and in falling in love with Rinoa and how he deals with all this while the whole time trying to shut everyone else out around him.
Right.
This scene in the flower field is a key moment in Squall's character progression.
Right.
Him coming fully over the hump of letting go of that need to protect himself and shut other people out and accepting Rinoa into his heart.
Right, because what he's essentially saying in this scene is we're not going to be apart. Like, I don't foresee a future, at the moment, I do not foresee a future where we aren't together. And if that ever happens, I'm going to be here and I'll just be waiting for you. That's what my life is, only with you. And if for some reason we're not together, I'm literally just going to be waiting for you so that I can continue my life.
Right.
That is essentially what he's saying. And that's a pretty big deal for Squall.
It's a huge deal.
To not only admit that to himself, but to say that out loud to a living, breathing human. And
he's making a declaration. He's making a promise that he's going to protect her. He's going to be her knight to the end. He's there for her.
Yeah.
He's opening up himself to her. He's letting her in. He's breaking the barrier he set up around himself.
Yeah.
He's fully opening his heart to her. This is huge for Squall, and it's huge for the core theme of the game. So that scene being included as a setup in the opening FMV is a really great idea.
Yeah.
Right? Alluding to that scene. Now, the only thing that I would change in the opening FMV, in the way they do it, is just in how they chose to write those words.
Yeah.
First of all, I wouldn't have made it as repetitive as they did. They essentially repeat the same sentiment 3 times. Okay, first time, I'll be here, question why. Statement, I'll be waiting here, essentially repeating exactly the same thing as the first one. Question again, for what?
But here's the thing, for what means why.
Yeah.
Like the word why in
repetition.
Spanish is por qué, but por qué means for what.
Yes.
That's what it means.
Yes.
And so...
So 2 or 4 lines that repeat the same sentiment
the
twice.
same sentiment, yeah.
Then the third time, I'll be waiting for you, so if you come here, you'll find me, I promise. So we have a statement, a question,
Yeah.
a repetition of the same statement, a further clarification asking question, and then a barely explained same exact sentiment with a little bit extra on the end.
Yes, yes, yes.
It is my position that that is bad dialogue. It's too repetitious.
What if, because we're having to assume a lot here. This is a voice on the wind, and the question saying why and for what should be in parentheses as if it's someone's thoughts, not someone talking, not a dialogue.
Yeah.
So if the why and for what is someone thinking as they are hearing this voice in the wind, then all of a sudden, like, it can make a little bit more sense, right?
Yes.
That's not what we can tell is happening here. But that would be a pretty subtle change that would make it feel a lot better.
Here's the only thing I would have changed about this part. I would have had one vague statement,
Right.
a question to ask for clarification, and then a clarifying statement. The end. So
just cut out the middle
I'll
two.
be here. You can choose for what or why. I don't care which. Either question. Only one of them. I'll go with for what. I'll be here. For what? If you come here, you'll find me, I promise. That is what I would have put as the text for that as it's pushing out into the ocean part.
And instead of the ... dots, you can do I'll come here just as one text, let it fade off.
Yes, fade
Then,
away.
you know,
or
you
have
can
some kind of
find me-
effect where like,
Yes, you can find me, and then
Waves
I
off or
promise
something.
can just be a thing. So instead of using the ellipses to produce a dramatic effect, you can literally just reveal the text in a
Yes.
more dramatic way that
and
will have the same
some
effect.
kind of effect where it wisps away or something like that.
Right, instead of just the...
So
They kind of do, though. It kind of blurs out and gets all...
That's-
doesn't
it
wisp
kinda does
away,
do
but
that,
it just
but-
kind of
you're right.
fades a little.
But anyways, I'll be here for what? If you come here, you'll find me, I promise. Bam. The entire sentiment is there. It's
Right.
just way more efficient
Yeah.
and less repetitive. And here's the other part. So carrying on into another thing that bothers me about the opening FMV is its mixture of diegetic and non-diegetic elements in a way that to me comes off as a little bit clumsy.
Yeah.
Right? Because it feels like we talked about the start screen demo montage
Yes.
that plays when you leave the start screen alone for a
Yes.
second and the game just kind of shows you a little trailer.
Exactly,
thing.
yeah.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah, yeah.
But it actually also serves at the same time as the legitimate opening scene of the game.
Yes,
And
because it
so-
is the hook for the whole story.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that it mixes this diegetic and non-diegetic elements together is what leaves you feeling like, oh, this must be just kind of some montage thing. The game
Yes.
hasn't really started yet.
Right.
So, for instance, Squall's gunblade does not come flipping down from the heavens, landing into the dirt. It's a cool shot.
Yeah.
It's a freaking cool cinematic
Yes.
shot. The composition's awesome. It didn't actually happen though.
Does not happen. Yeah.
So that makes me think, oh, okay, that's what makes it feel montagey.
Yeah.
And not like, oh, we're actually having an opening sequence here, right?
You remember the beginning of like Super Smash Brothers when
Yeah.
you just leave it alone and then it shows the little cinematic of the characters like fighting,
Yes.
but it's not relevant to how the game actually goes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
exactly.
It feels just like that.
Exactly. And there was someone else, I think it was Chocolate Rob brought up, you know, there are other games like Silent Hill, and he lists a couple of others that do this type of thing. And it's like, the difference, especially in Silent Hill, is that it really only plays on the demo screen, or the demo only plays on the start screen. When you actually press start and you start the game up, that scene doesn't play again.
I see.
It just
I see.
brings you into the aftermath of the car crash, and the character looking for his daughter, and he starts exploring Silent Hill. but the game, you don't press start, new game, and then it plays that montage.
Which in Final Fantasy VIII it does.
Which is exactly what FF8 does.
Yeah.
Because the demo on the start screen for FF8 is just all those images while it does like the opening credits.
Yeah.
That dun 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 music. And then it shows a bunch of just still images that are in black and white with opening credits.
Yeah.
When you actually press new game, you get the shot pushing out from the ocean, and you get this whole intro sequence.
And then this all happens.
So,
Gotcha.
Part number one, the way the dialogue is written right at the beginning. Part two, the mixing of diegetic and non-diegetic elements together.
Yeah.
I would stick with purely diegetic elements.
Sure.
So I would just play the scene of Squall and Seifer fighting each other as it actually happens, rather than try to style it up so much with all of these non-diegetic elements in it.
Right.
Now, the third thing that people brought up that the opening FMV is intended to set up or to foreshadow is the time compression idea.
Right, just because it's a montage and everything's happening simultaneously, right?
Yes, and I'm not sure I agree that that was the intention of this.
No, I don't think it would have been.
But if it was, I think that you could make it a diegetic element of the scene somehow.
Sure.
By having Squall reacting to seeing these visions.
Multiple things at once,
right?
Yeah.
So Squall is having some kind of glitch in the matrix, we'll call it, where he is legitimately seeing these things that are going to come in the future or something. There's a time compression glitch happening in his brain while he is fighting Seifer. And it's because...
And then he gets hit.
It's because he's distracted by this stuff happening that he gets cut.
And the cut is diegetic. It really did happen.
Yes.
And he has that scar the whole rest of the game.
Yes. So you could have shots of Squall, like you show Edea or something like that, like those shots of Edea, and he's like, whoa, what was that? And he's visibly sort of confused.
Yes.
And then he's caught off guard by Seifer, and he's back in the fight again.
That would introduce it better.
And then I would also show more than what they do, because in the opening FMV, they basically only show the flower field, Seifer and Squall fighting, and then the part right before the Edea speech.
Yeah.
And that's it. Well, I guess at the very end they show Squall and Noah falling to each other's arms.
But not really. The close. They don't touch.
They don't quite get
They don't
there.
touch. It doesn't
so
happen.
there's like 4 scenes in total. We're going to exclude the scene we're in right now. They are foreshadowing 3 scenes in the game.
Right.
The Edea speech scene, the flower field scene, and Squall rescuing Renoa from the Sorceress's memorial.
Right.
What I would have done is sneak some Laguna in there. I would have to say maybe LNA is trying to like send him in the past. You know, like there's a lot of other scenes I would have included. I would have gone for maybe 6 or 7 little sequences to
because they had enough. They could have done that.
They had enough space for it.
Yeah.
But they kind of just kept showing Edea.
Yes.
And if they had flashed to like 5 or 6 or 7 different scenes, and each time you see that Squall himself is actually experiencing some kind of, he's seeing these things somehow, right? That would have set this up in a diegetic way as something funky is going on with time, or he's seeing visions somehow, or these are all things that are important to the plot.
Yeah.
And they would set them up in a diegetic way that make you go, oh, what's that? What's that about? Like, why is he seeing all these? And if just those things only had been changed, I feel like that opening FMV would have been a really great opening sequence and a hook to the game. They could have kept it as an FMV rather than making it playable, and it wouldn't have felt like, oh, I'm just watching like a demo. Okay, I'm just going relaxing and watching this. It would have been like, no, pay attention to this. This the game started. It's actually happening. So, like starting off with Squall and Seifer, like walking into the arena they're going to fight in, right? Pulling their gun blades out. Maybe they have a line of dialogue back and forth or something. Like, ready for this? You set up their teasing or their ribbing of each other, their rivalry a little bit, and then they go at it and start. And then he starts to have these like visions or whatever, and he hears this voice, which is, in reality, it's his own voice because he's the one making the promise that he'll be here.
Yeah,
right?
You feel like it's not, but it is.
But if you're going to set up time compression, I think that would have been a better way to do it. So anyways, those were just the extra points I wanted
just
to make.
if you try to connect just a montage to time compression, montages are so common. They're used all the time, everywhere. It never tends to hint at this kind of a thing in Final Fantasy VIII. And so if that was what Nomura was going for, that may have been the wrong tool to accomplish it, because this type of montage edit is used so often for other things.
Yeah.
That it doesn't actually seem to suggest, because editing in general is non-diegetic. And so you don't feel like it suggests anything to the actual story.
Right.
It just doesn't come across that way.
It feels
but
like
it is kind of a cool-ish thing to look at later, but I doubt it was done on purpose.
Yeah, and it just feels more like a music video.
Yes,
It does
exactly like a music video.
Then something where it's like we're suggesting some really real mysteries for you to look at here,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
That are the story has started now, like pay
Yeah.
attention type of a deal, right?
Yeah.
So doing this would set up time compression. It would set up Squall's like character arc of needing to like let people into his heart, and like it would set up. And some people brought up, the connection with Seifer is really important. I'm not really sure I agree with that, but I'll get to that more in a minute when we talk about Seifer at the end of the game.
Okay.
I don't think that. I'll just say that I don't think Squall and Seifer's rivalry ends up having any thematic relevance to the story at all. It kind of starts off like that. I think the way Seifer is handled in Disc 1 merits, or maybe they were going for something with that, where that would tie in more, especially with a possible love triangle between Seifer, Squall, and Rinoa, but that doesn't really amount to anything by the end. And the fact that Seifer and Squall are rivals doesn't really lend to any thematic consequence by the end of the game. It doesn't really matter anymore.
No.
So I don't see why setting that up in the opening scene is that important. But I'll talk about that more in a minute. Let's move on past this.
Okay.
And talk about sorceresses and their knights, right? So you go in and you talk to Idea at the orphanage, and she mentions how sorceresses in history, like throughout history, like part of what keeps them from sort of like going off the deep end with their, like the power that they have, and becoming tyrants or oppressive, is whether they have a knight.
So this is fascinating. I absolutely love this specific part of the game, because Idea, like the sorceress's knight, is meant to protect the sorceress, but it's meant to protect the sorceress from herself.
Yes.
More so.
Yes.
And this is probably the biggest part that maybe Seifer didn't
get
understand, is that though the knight is the executioner of the sorceress' bidding, well, no, the knight protects the sorceress, but from herself. The greatest threat to a sorceress is her own power.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. I think it's fascinating. And then that gives a different kind of, because as soon as Squall starts suggesting, well, I'll be your knight, Rinoa, the initial thought is, if Rinoa becomes evil and all this stuff, then that means Squall's going to become evil too. But there's a subtle difference in the way Seifer looks at it, and then the way Idea and presumably Squall looks at it, which is it's to protect you from yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. I think that's really cool, actually. It's a really cool addition to the game.
And I also really liked that when Idea is talking about that, she suggests Sid is her knight. She doesn't say anything about Seifer, right? So Seifer was never really Idea's knight.
Right.
Because he wasn't serving that role.
No.
He wasn't protecting her from herself.
Right.
He was enabling, or essentially just serving as a puppet to the whims of Ultimecia, ultimately. He kind of became the Knight of Ultimecia, but not really, though, because the role of the Knight is this purpose. It's to keep the sorceress from becoming evil.
Yes.
Right? And Seifer was never doing that. So he was never really a knight in the first place, which is ironic considering he finally had the opportunity to live his childhood dream. He had no idea what that role even was.
But that's what happens when your childhood dream is linked to like a Hollywood movie or something, where it's like you get a screwed up version of the thing as opposed to the actual mythology. You just watched a movie about it, and movies tend not to do justice to the actual thing. But if you learn your morals from movies, then you kind of end up not being a very moral person, and that kind of seems to be kind of the way Seifer went.
He had a very naive, childlike understanding of what a sorceress's knight is and what the role of that that
Yeah.
person is for the sorceress. He thought it was just, it was all about the glory or the recognition or the position, the
general. Like you're the general of our military.
Yeah.
It's like that's not what you are.
Yeah.
But that's how Hollywood would portray it.
Yes.
In any way.
Exactly. So it's really cool that Idea sort of like details the importance of the sorceress's night, and she's telling this to Squall and Renoa because she can see that they are they've come into that role for each other,
Yes.
right? So he's
and the mirror between, as I mentioned in the last episode, between her and Sid is so evident with Squall and Renoa, and especially the way that he's willing to, do so much just to be able to save her. He already has committed to being her knight. He doesn't. There is no more needed to be done. Like it's already happening. He already is there.
Exactly. And she goes on to say that Adel never had a knight, right? The most malicious sorceress that they've ever known in this world, Adel, was a sorcerer who never had a knight. And presumably that's kind of the reason she went as far overboard as she did.
There was nobody to
And then she speculates. She speculates that Ultimecia, the sorceress from the future, that is the one who's taking over all of these people in the present, she probably doesn't have a knight either. Right? So I really like that little moment as a world building moment, as a moment of Idea sort of becoming like humanized a little more. Sid, we talked about this last time, like Sid's desperation to save his wife, pushing him to like kind of force Squall into a leadership position, even though it makes no sense to do that because he's 17 and there's probably more qualified people, but he knows because Idea saw by the ending of the game that a seed named Squall, who she knows is one of her orphan kids, is going to grow up to defeat the sorceress Ultimecia.
So it has to be him.
It has to be him.
So Sid would just push him and push him and push him. And in part, it's the desperation to save his wife, the same that Squall felt to save Renoa. Just that crazy, nothing else matters.
Everything Sid does is within the role of the sorceress's knight. He's trying to protect his wife from herself. And so
when you look at it that way, it's actually an incredibly romantic story between Sid and Idea, and specifically at the very end when we see the credits and they've got like the home video, that they're filming. To see when you see Sid and Matron together in a more realistic kind of setting, and they kind of have a moment together. It's I felt it was really powerful. I did not feel that in my first playthrough, but with this one, as I'm analyzing things a lot more, and I'm seeing that Sid's relationship to Idea became a lot more important to me.
It's really well done, and I just thought this scene was really good. It's a great way of bringing it all together. It's a great world building moment. It's a great character moment for all involved, for Squall and Renoa and their romance, for Sid and Idea and their relationship. There's great payoffs here.
Even, branching out to like Seifer and what crap he's gotten himself into that is just not what he thinks it is. This helps to like shed light on that.
Yeah, I think it's really good. So big thumbs up for this, for these two scenes back to back. I think they're freaking great.
You know what's funny though? So Seifer has a twisted idea of what it means to be a knight, right? But Seifer has Fujin and Raijin, which, as far as I can tell, they are like his knights, basically.
Kind of,
where they really are, they'll fight for him, but at the same time, they will also not fight for him. Like, he wants them to fight, but they won't, but it's for his good. It's almost like he has those knights for himself. He has those people who care so much about him that even when he tells them to do something, sometimes they just say, no, we're not going to do this because it's for your own good. He had those people for himself, yet he still kind of overlooked that in when he was trying to be a knight for the sorceress. I think that's.
I think that is actually a good point. It's a good thing to point out. So when we kind of brushed over this in the last episode, because we figured Squall is brushing over it in this moment, so it's okay to kind of stick in it where he is in his mentality.
Sure.
But Idea was explaining who Ultimecia is and what Ultimecia's goal is.
We should probably talk about that.
And we haven't really talked about that ourselves because Squall was like, I don't care, I just want to save Renoa. So we're like, look, we're going to stick with Squall's mentality for this, but it's probably good now to actually talk about what is
now we're
time
getting
compression.
into this. And why is it spelled with a K? time compression.
No,
not all the
no,
time.
that's just how she says it.
Why though?
I think she has an accent.
Yeah.
So it's just, she has a weird accent.
But a K makes the same sound as a C.
I think it's supposed to be a hard K.
Compression.
Yeah,
something
kinda like that.
So I kind of figured that same thing too. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny. That was funny.
So-
Sounds like Dr. Odine saying it.
I think it's meant to, the suggestion is meant to be she has this really like, almost, I don't know, like Russian-esque sort of like emphasis on those hard consonants.
I guess there's no other way to do it because the whole rest of the word, compression, you would roll the R, but there's no way
How
to
would
signify
you,
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, anyways,
Makes sense.
Ultimecia is a sorceress from the future of this world.
Yes.
What is
Like
happening?
the far distant future.
Yeah.
Thousands of years.
We don't know
way ahead.
exactly when, but it's in the future somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's, I would say presumably the distant future,
Yeah.
right?
Well, because at least multiple generations of seeds' lives later.
Sure, yes.
Because that much is revealed.
So she becomes aware of her fate. She's going to be killed by a seed
Yeah.
named Squall. She knows this is going to happen. She knows she's going to die. So everything that she's doing is to try to avoid death, right? She's trying to avoid being killed by seed. So she has a machine that has the same power that Elene has back here in Squall's time.
And that was Dr. Odine's machine.
Right. Dr.
By the way, do
Odine-
you remember the name of that machine? It was hilarious. I can't remember it
don't.
either. But it was like the time machine thinking Elene, something with the name Elene.
The Elene was in the machine.
Yeah, but it was
the
like
title.
it was the worst title you could ever think. I wish I could remember it.
But it's important to point out that that Elene's power is really unique. As far as I think we know, she's the only person
Yeah, that's
who
true.
has this power.
That's kind of unusual.
It's not like a regular sorceress's power.
And it's also not even clear to why she has that power.
Yes.
She just was born with it, and that's just how it is.
Yes. So when Adel was seeking out to kidnap Elene earlier in the game, they kind of presented it as maybe she was looking for an heir, and Elene was a candidate to become a sorceress.
be the new
I don't think Adel was ever planning
On dying
on
and
dying
passing her
or
power.
passing her power off to anyone.
I think that's a good assumption.
Maybe other sorceresses did that, so that was the
Yeah.
assumption of some of the NPCs who were talking about it, right?
Right.
But Adele wanted Elene not because she could be a sorceress, but because she had this power to send people's consciousness
Yeah.
into the past.
Yeah. And possibly affect change
Yes.
in the past.
Which is what Ultimecia wants.
Exactly.
So Ultimecia knows that this machine she's using, developed by Dr. Odine, was influenced by his testing of a girl named Elene.
Right.
So she's using it to travel back in time to kidnap Elene, to control Adea or whoever else she has to kidnap Elene to make sure that the machine is created for her in the future, right?
Which is why Elene's life is absolute misery.
Total
like
mess.
her whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So Odine is successful in creating this machine. And so this machine that Ultimecia uses in the future to transport her consciousness into the past is the same power that Elene uses to do it for Squall during the course of the game. So it's I'm so conflicted on this because in one way, the game does such a good job of building a consistent time model.
Yeah.
In another way, her goal makes absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah.
Because in the end, as Laguna explains, or I think Odino explains back in Esthar, Ultimecia is trying to take control of Adel in this time period
Right.
to have Elene send Adele further into the past to cast time compression. At which time, so let's talk about time compression for a second.
Right.
The idea of time compression is to create some kind of singularity
Right.
where
Everything's
all
happening
time
simultaneously.
is compressed into a singular moment.
Yeah.
This will erase the timeline where Ultimecia is killed by Seed. She's hoping to essentially destroy the timeline and escape from that and create a new universe, a new existence, a new, whatever you want to call it, parallel timeline or something. She's trying to escape the timeline which is fixed. We talked about how last time the past can't be changed in this world. You cannot change time. Fate is a very real concept. Ultimecia is trying her very hardest to do that. Her idea is to cast time compression so that time is irrelevant now, and she can like create a new timeline.
I have a thought here because I that is what I thought as well. I'm wondering if, and this may be wrong, just tell me if this is wrong.
Okay.
There's this timeline, right? We've got a line. And the time compression is not necessary, because I always felt it was weird. How do you go past the time compression, which is what they say? Go past it until you get to her time, and then everything's fine, right? So it's not all time that was compressed. It was just from point A to point B along this timeline that was compressed. And that's why Adel needs to go into the past to whenever before Squall was born, or whenever, just sometime before Squall, and then this other point sometime after Squall, and compress just that time. And they need to get past that until they get to this next
What you just said
timeline
makes like a million times more sense.
But is it right? I don't know if it's right, but I did have that thought on this second playthrough
So just
that I did
compress-
not think.
To compress
They're
a
just
certain period of time.
Instead
but
of
not all of
time, yeah. Because she still exists. There's still a mansion. There's still time, as far as I can tell, once you get past the time compression into her realm,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like it was just point A to point B that got compressed, not all time.
Here's what I think is actually happening, but I like that better.
I mean, who knows?
I was about to go into at the end of this
Someone will know.
I was about to go into at the end, and I still will, how I don't subscribe to fan theories and I don't like fan theories. I kind of like that one, but
I mean, well, it may be real though. Like that may be the correct.
what I
just
think
don't
is
know if
actually
there's enough
happening
info.
is that time compression is underway, but it is not completed. Like it's
Okay,
never
that's-
actually
okay, sure.
finished. So like
see.
things start getting wacky.
Yeah.
And like it's really weird and psychedelic, and time is definitely distorted, but it has not fully been compressed yet, and the party defeats Ultimecia before time compression is done. So it's like they use these, I'll call it holes or warps in time that are happening due to the compression to get through to where she is in her time.
Yes.
And they beat her before time compression can actually be
Okay.
completed.
I mean, that is more or less what I thought the first time I played it. I just didn't like that. And so I came up with this with this new idea this next time. But I mean, given the final battle with her and the way the background
Yes.
moves. Now, Final Fantasy just tends to have psychedelic backgrounds sometimes just for fun, and it doesn't mean anything.
Because it looks sweet.
But exactly, because it looks cool. But like anime, there's
Yeah.
background flashing, but that's
Yeah.
not what's really happening. And it does seem to fit well along with that in this, where like during this battle, time compression is still kind of affecting everything around. But it would be pretty sweet if it wasn't,
Just Squall's time to try and kill him or something.
because she only needed him gun. She didn't need to get rid of all time, just this point. And that's why basically from Adel until whatever after that. And then,
But here's my point. There is no reason, given what time compression is, to have to go back into the distant past to cast it.
you just do it right
She
now.
could cast time compression from
Right.
her own time,
But
right?
see, that's why I believe that she needed Adele. That's why I believe it's point A to point B, because you need this point in time to
Yeah.
have it cast, and then this point in time, and it just eliminates the in between.
I have time compression pulled up on a wiki here,
I doubt they'll say what I just said, and I doubt what I said is
didn't
really
read
what
that.
they thought.
but I like your theory.
It's probably a really
way
long
better.
wiki.
No, it really only says this.
See, because there isn't much. Okay.
It's not that long. It basically just, okay. Let me just get to this part. When time and space begin to compress, Squall and his allies watch the world turn upside down as 1,000 different kinds of space from 1,000 different points in time begin to fuse all around them. The party must swim through the psychedelic landscape to reach Ultimecia. Because time and space are merging, moving through space allows the party to also move through time and emerge on the site of the old orphanage in the future. In keeping with time compression's psychedelic nature, the party initially lands in a version of Adea's waiting hall in Delling City, wherein the atmosphere is foggier and there is a save point.
No, right.
When the party steps on the save point, a dozen more spring up in the room. So this is just kind of when it starts getting crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it just
kind of
starts getting
explaining.
all psycho.
And then this is just explaining how they can exist through this. We'll get to this in a minute. And then it just finishes off with saying they find Ultimecia's castle, they kill her. So it doesn't say
Okay,
that.
yeah,
Up
well.
here it says time compression is the concept of condensing all of time and space into a single moment or singularity.
And if that is from the text of the game, then that is what it is, you know.
This is the thing about
Yeah.
the way FF8 and FF10 and FF13 and all of
Oh my gosh,
Katase's
10.
Final Fantasies work.
Yeah.
They're not very clear on these points.
Yeah.
And it creates some confusion.
But
and
it also creates fan theories,
Fan
which
theories.
Katase loves because it engages the community and gets
Yes.
them to fill in the gaps for him.
More on that later. So I've established essentially my confusion regarding the need to time travel back
Right.
in time. You've come up with a pretty good solution for that.
It just may not be.
It just might not.
Official.
It depends on whether or not time compression is meant to compress the
All
entire
time,
time,
yeah.
all of it from beginning to end, or if it's just a certain space of time that she wants compressed in particular. And they've got to escape from that compression over into her time, which is
Yeah.
not being compressed.
Which is, it doesn't seem to be compressed to me while we're there. It doesn't look at all like the psychedelics
Good theory.
of where we were at before.
Good theory. It's the first fan theory I've ever liked.
All right.
All right. So that's time compression. That's the Sorceress Ultimecia.
Yeah.
This is the party's goal now, is to make it through this time compression, kill her, save the timeline from being
Right.
destroyed, right? So you end up going back to Esthar,
Yeah.
where this is all explained.
You meet
by
with Laguna.
Laguna, you find out Laguna's the president of Esthar. Do you know what I really liked about this? It was really hilarious.
What?
The very first thing Laguna says when he sees Squall are, "Man, you look too serious." And Squall's
That's great.
response,
That's great.
Squall's response is whatever.
Oh my gosh.
Freaking hilarious. I love it.
Oh my gosh, I love
We've been
that.
following these two
Yeah.
characters as kind of our main characters of the whole game.
Yeah.
And their first time meeting each
Yeah.
other's, "Man, you look too serious." Hilarious,
Whatever.
total encapsulates Laguna's personality.
Yes, absolutely.
And then Squall's replies, whatever. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I love that scene. Awesome, hilarious.
That's funny.
Okay, so now we need to talk a little bit about how it is that they're meant to survive this time compression.
Okay.
It's a little corny.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little cliche in the power of friendship RPG
All you
way.
need is love. Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's
Mm-hmm.
actually pretty relevant and important to Squall's character arc
Yeah.
in a very specific way that we have not touched on in great detail yet.
Okay. I liked it this time. I liked it this playthrough.
I still think it's corny, but it's important but maybe it's because it's coming from Laguna, and Laguna's a corny dude.
That's true. He may not have been the
So
best to deliver that.
maybe he's not the best guy to explain it.
Right.
But this is what he says. He says, Ultimecia lives far in the future where none of us can technically exist. There's only one way to make yourself exist in a world like that. As friends, don't forget one another. As friends, believe in one another. Believe in your friend's existence, and they'll also believe in yours. To be friends, to like one another, and to love one another, you can't do these things alone. Big emphasis for me there.
Right.
You can't do these
Right.
things alone.
Yeah.
That's all relating to
You
Squall's
need someone else to
core theme.
believe you.
believe in you and
yeah.
remember you.
Yes.
Keep you in their mind and heart.
Right.
I'm going to get to this in a
Yes,
second.
mind and heart. That's right.
You need somebody, right, guys? What place reminds you of your friends? We've had this set up already. Squall and Renoa set up their place, their promised place. What place reminds you of your friends? Imagine being in that place with all your friends. Once time compression begins, think of that place and try to get there. That's all. That place will welcome you. You'll be able to get there no matter what period you're in. You need love and friendship for this mission, and the courage to believe it. It's all about love, friendship, and courage. Right. So it's corny as all get it. It's very, very corny.
My Little Pony. Yeah, yeah.
100%. It's Laguna saying it, so I excuse it to some degree. However, there are a couple of really key things here. You can't do this alone. You can't do these things alone. Imagine being in a place with all your friends. That place will welcome you. You'll be able to get there no matter what period you're in. Those are the key parts for
Yeah.
me. Those are the key parts of what he's saying. Do you remember back in Galbadia Garden when they announced that Seifer had been executed?
Yep.
And everyone's talking about their memories of Seifer.
And he says, I will never...
Squall freaks out.
He freaks out. He doesn't want to be talked about in the past tense, right? Yeah.
He really freaked out. He has a huge fear about that.
Yep.
And he made a huge scene and he ran out of the room, just exploded emotionally. He has this fear of being forgotten.
Yep.
And being talked about or just becoming a memory or whatever, right? He's really freaked out about that.
Which Tetsuya Nomura resurrects in Advent Children, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children later, where Sephiroth is like, I'll never become just a memory. And Cloud's like, get back in my memories where you belong. The Final Fantasy VIII of Tetsuya Nomura kind of creeps up into Final Fantasy VII a little bit there.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point. Yeah. Now, for a little while, I was like, what relevance does this end up playing in the story? It feels kind of like a strange scene because it's like he blows up about this and seemingly it's never really brought up again.
Right.
Now, there are two key areas where I feel like it, in one it kind of does, but not in any really big way. And then once it's just almost a throwaway line from Manoa. So when Squall is getting tortured by Seifer,
that's right.
you have a dialogue option where he can either lie or he can, he basically can either like give in and be like, whatever, just kill me.
Right.
Or he can try to lie because I need to stay alive.
Right.
I have always chosen the whatever, just kill me.
It seems like what Squall
I don't know
would do.
why naturally that feels like the right choice to me. But when I think about how he acted in Galbadia Garden, I think he would probably be a little more desperate to stay alive
a little bit better
and lie. He's also a really bad liar, so that's part of the problem
because
too.
he doesn't fake emotions. He doesn't do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there was part of me that thought maybe it's better to choose the other option because he's really afraid of just becoming a memory or whatever.
Okay, so how does that go?
I wish I knew. I will make an addendum and show it because I didn't go back and replay the scene because I'd have to replay a lot from my save point to be able to like get to that. It would take probably like 15, 20 minutes just to record that part. Okay. I guess I could try to go find it on someone else's playthrough, but I have to find someone who made that choice on their playthrough. I will do that for the video when I upload it and show the optional dialogue there and make a point about that, whether it's relevant or not.
Okay, so here I am. I just recorded the second option there during the torture scene, the one where Squall lies to try to save himself. And the answer he gives is pretty interesting, actually. For those who are listening to this audio only and you're not seeing the visual on the screen, basically he tries to come up with a lie. So the first thing he says in answer is flower. And the prison warden is like, what are you talking about? And he elaborates on that by saying Seed's goal is to spread seeds all over the world. Essentially to flower all over the planet, right? And the guy's confused by that. Oh, so you're talking about, peace and love or whatever? And he's like, no, our goal is to take away people's will to fight because flowers, they give people feelings of peace or whatever. We take away their will to fight and then we invade. It's a really bad lie, but it seems to work because the guy's like, hey, I'm going to go tell Idea about this, and he walks away. So in the end, Squall seems to have saved himself from further torture, which is not how it ends if you go the other route. He ends up getting tortured more. But the interesting thing here is that he talks about, I guess the image that comes to my mind is the flower field at the end of the game. And I don't know if there's any meaningful connection between what he's saying here and the fact that that flower field is a really big part of the game and a big part of his character arc, like I talked about earlier. I think this is purely circumstantial, but maybe there is something there. I don't know. But it was just interesting to look at this dialogue because, like I said, I've played the game 5 times, and I'd never chosen this option before. So there you go. It is what it is.
But the last place where this is brought up again is when Squall and Rinoa first get inside the Ragnarok after they're in space together and they get inside of it and they're talking and she's like, oh, give me a hug. And he's like, what are you talking about? He says something like, look, right now we need to make sure that we get back safe to the planet or whatever, right? We need to get in there and like focus. And she says in response to that, so that we don't just become memories or something like that, right? Which signifies that she was listening to his fears and she's conscious of what's going on.
Yeah.
Inside him. And he's like, yes, that's exactly right. So she kind of brings that up again. Now, what's interesting about it is that the only way to survive time compression is to be held strongly in the memory of someone.
Right.
That becoming that like integral, strong memory to someone. The one thing he was like avoiding the whole game is the only way he survives time compression. It's because Rinoa holds him in her memory, because she holds him in her heart, which he fought against the whole game, that he actually ends up surviving time compression. Because he gets really lost.
He does.
After the boss fight. He has no idea where to go. He's getting lost in the time compression. She's lost, but she's looking for him, and she goes into the flower field.
Right,
there.
she's able to make it there without too much difficulty.
She is able to kind of summon him back into existence because she kept him in her memory.
Yeah.
I think that all kind of came together to me on this playthrough. Like his irrational fear of this, her kind of mentioning it again, and then Laguna talking about this is the only way that you can survive time compression, right? Is all the things that Squall tried not to have earlier in the story. To do things alone, to not believe in your friends, to like not let people into your heart, to, all those things that he pushed away is exactly what you need to have to survive time compression.
Wow.
I think that that's pretty cool.
Do you think Sid knew that?
Thematically? I don't know. I don't know if he did or not.
Because if Sid knew that, and if Sid knew this end, kind of the way Laguna did, then Sid constantly, well, amongst all of his friends as well, but Sid was kind of paired everybody up the way that he did on purpose, and, was always encouraging Squall to kind of open up a little bit.
It's true. I mean, maybe he did. I mean, if Laguna knows it, I mean, certainly,
Sid probably did.
certainly, other people have to know about it, right?
Don't be too hard on Laguna.
He's not that deep of a person. He's got to be repeating this from someone else. But it's super corny. It's a pretty lame concept
I have a little
for how to survive.
To say
However, it is thematically satisfying,
right?
And consistent.
Yeah.
I think it works for the theme, and therefore I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it's if you try to like, and there are a lot of people who have said this in the comments and things, if you try to take Final Fantasy VIII with too much of an analytical approach, if you try to like look into its rules too much, if you try to like put together the pieces, it's not going to come together. It's not really going to make that much sense, and you're probably not going to like it that much. You kind of just have to let that go and feel the game. And for people who can do that, they can,
It's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. Not everybody can just let go of that and still enjoy themselves.
Yes.
Right? But many people can, especially a lot of people in the comments as we've been reading them throughout the release of this series of podcasts, that people are saying like it really, like, what are they? It feels over reals. That's what everyone says. I know, but that there are a lot of people that really, really, really love this game, and we can see why. You know, but because we've kind of been on both sides of it. Thinking, oh, it wasn't quite so good, and then also coming back around and saying, wow, this is extremely good, and it's valuable to be able to see both sides. But there's no one game that's perfect and good for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And some people just aren't going to enjoy that, the My Little Pony aspect of Final Fantasy VIII. The friendship is magic. That's
the power of friendship can overcome the laws of physics.
Yes,
is a bit of a stretch for me.
But here's the thing. Like, it kind of can, though. Like, there is some reality to friendship is magic with, to the My Little Pony friendship is magic stuff, which I've never seen, by the way. I'm just saying, it just sounds funny.
Yeah.
But I've been I guess mostly last year, I kind of been thinking a lot about just like reality and what reality is just in general, because I've been following some people online who talk a lot about like manufactured reality or the possibility that we live in a simulation or whatever that is, and I find a lot of it, it's not like I'm buying into everything, but I do, as the more that I learn about how you can kind of alter reality or your own reality, or the way that, for instance, like news or the media can kind of create reality for everybody, and how history books are like, if you think that today that, you know, the media isn't super honest, or that news is glossing over things it shouldn't or whatever, just imagine history. Like if you think that we're currently in a weird place, that's kind of always been going on, right?
How reliable, because history is written by the victor, right?
Exactly, exactly. And that's commonly known, but we still study it as if it's the true version of events. But that's because we don't really have anything else, because the victor doesn't allow the minority narrative to surface after they've claimed victory. And so they get to control the narrative. And whoever controls the narrative literally makes reality, right? And the idea being, if people believe it, it becomes real, right? And so if you are an influential news anchor and you have enough power and clout to kind of silence the dissenting people around you, I guess news anchors wouldn't have that power. You'd have to be well above just a news anchor to have that kind of power. But there are some people who, for some things, I'm not saying they can do this for everything, but for some things, they can silence the critics and they can silence dissent. And by doing that, they can literally create reality that everyone believes. And the shared belief amongst everybody is what makes it reality in some weird way, you know? And you've got to really stretch your mind thinking here and imagine that we're living in a simulation, right? That kind of makes this a lot easier. If you can just assume we live in a simulation that kind of has somewhat of a script to it, and things are kind of going in a guided direction, right? Then it's like reality isn't reality, right? It feels real, but it's not actually real. As in the Matrix, as Morpheus says, if reality is only what you can see, hear, smell, or touch, then reality is just electrical signals in your brain being interpreted.
Yes.
Well, is that reality?
Well, that was the point I was going to bring up, is that, like, I was studying this a couple years ago. I might have mentioned it in a couple previous podcasts, but just like how something I'm fascinated about is how two people with the same stimulus, they play the same game, they watch the same movie, they eat the same food,
yet it seems like they live
totally opposite
in different worlds.
Experiences with that.
And then
it's because our brains are so complex, and the way they are interpreting those electrical signals is different in their head than this person, meaning that they are having a different reality than this person.
They're watching a different movie than you're watching.
They're
playing a different game.
The chocolate cake tastes different to you than it does to me.
To anyone, But we interpret it as chocolate. And in that sense, it's like, and you got to kind of destroy your conceptions of reality in order to kind of get there. But just allow this little suggestion to enter into whatever you perceive as reality, and just understand that people can manipulate reality. That reality isn't just a set in stone thing, that there are ways you can subtly kind of change literally what is reality, because reality is different for everybody and it's malleable, and you need like a collective hive consciousness to constitute what most people agree on as being reality. But you're never going to get 100%.
General consensus on what red is.
And any one person, exactly. And any one person can kind of deviate from that but still be within it, or deviate from it and then change the whole thing. They call it the Overton window of acceptable discourse, that it can shift, you know? You can literally shift what people are allowed to say, and it shifts reality. It shifts what the history books will be writing about. And they'll say this is what happened, and it's not what happened. But that's what reality is. So anyways, just that idea, if you will entertain that idea for a brief period of time, you can see how just believing in something can like create some type of reality in a different sphere. Now this Vinyl CTA 8 is taken us to a completely different level, but the roots of it are there, you know? And so I found it a lot more approachable this time, just this idea, especially when you're dealing with like supernatural or beyond time, you know, like like Space Odyssey 2001 or something. Like at the end of that movie where things are just getting weird, right? It's almost like what is thought, you know? Like thought is a form of creation in and of itself, right? Like creativity. That's what your thoughts can create. And so it's not that weird. It's just not that weird, guys. It's not that weird. I know it sounds weird, and I probably did the worst job ever explaining it, but it's not as super awful as like My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. This is just a little kid's game. There is something deeper there, and it's just you gotta really look for it.
So we're derailing big time here, but I just want to ask a question in regards to this to kind of tie it around, because it is a really interesting point.
Yeah.
And there's definitely like some truth to like perceived reality versus like
Yes, objective
reality,
which may
right?
not really even exist, but yeah.
Right.
Because nobody can, anyways.
Like, I mean, if we stretch this far enough, you can't just believe hard enough that you can jump to the moon and get there. You know what I mean?
There are limitations.
There's laws
You're
of
right.
nature you
There are
can't
limitations.
overcome just by thinking they
Exactly.
are different than they
That
are,
is correct.
right?
Yeah, that is correct.
Obviously, there's some line in the sand somewhere, but
Yes.
on perceived reality, on
Yeah.
our understanding of reality, that can change and be created by
Right.
whoever wants to like lead the narrative.
So
But
just
what I'm
allow
not
your
sure about,
imagination to stretch that a little bit.
what I'm not sure about is whether you can think your way out of a black hole.
I know that's something, isn't it?
Whether you can believe your
What else
way out of a
can you
black
do
hole.
though? Like what else can you do?
What else can you do is die, which is
But
probably
here's
what
the
happened.
thing. Well, here's the thing though, and we're gonna talk about some of the fan theories later.
'Kay.
When we say die, you probably know where I'm going with
Yes.
this. But I mean, people probably know where I don't even know if I need to say it. What if everyone did die because time compression literally killed everyone, and the only existence is whatever the last electrical firings of your brain consider to be reality made up this story? Like, there's a Civil War story about a guy who he's being hung on a bridge, right?
Yeah.
But he has this dream that the rope breaks and he falls into the river and he starts swimming away and they're all shooting at him, they're all trying to kill him, and he's getting away and he made it all the way out. A miraculous escape, 1 in a million. And then his dream slowly starts to fade, and the end of the story is the rope didn't break. He's dead.
He died.
That was just his brain kind of in its last moments, kind
Yeah.
of creating a new reality of what was happening
you
other than
are-
what actually happened, right? So if everyone just died, but this is like the weird misfirings of a brain dreaming its last dream, through death, then maybe the Squall is dead theory can have a little more weight in Final Fantasy VIII. It just happens later than people assume it happened. It happened during time compression. Everything's gone, but this is a dream.
Rather than-
I'm not saying this is what happened, by the way. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if you're having a hard time, which, okay, we've talked about this before as well, but that it could be a way of looking at things to make a little bit of sense.
Squall is dead. You subscribe to Squall is dead?
I do not, because it works for me to some extent. But
Yeah.
there is always the chance that that's what we're seeing.
Sure. Okay.
I'm sorry, that was...
No, I think it was great. I think people are going to enjoy that. You better enjoy it because there's not that much left to talk about.
Good. I mean, we're approaching the end of the game here.
So I didn't take that many notes in the
Yeah.
actual like end game. I kind of
I
just
didn't
like
either.
I kind of just got through it and it was just kind of like, oh, stuff's happening. And
It was cool. It felt a bit tedious, going through the mansion and everything, and like
Yeah.
the pictures on the wall and kind of interpreting what was there. I mean,
Yeah.
that was cool.
It was kind of a cool final dungeon.
Yeah.
But before that, the only thing I really took note of is more about Seifer. So when you go back to the Lunatic Pandora and you initiate sort of like the end game sequence, right? You
where
go
you
through
fight
the
Adel.
Lunatic Pandora and you fight Adel and Seifer first, and then
Yeah,
you
yeah.
go through time compression and go to Ultimecia's castle. And,
Because you send her back, and then like immediate time compression's happening.
yeah, it begins.
Yeah.
And then you swim through time compression and you arrive at Ultimecia's castle and fight and kill her. We'll get that in a minute. Did you get Odin in your playthrough?
Yes, they're at that weird island at the facility kind of place, and you got to go
Yeah.
down like a bunch of levels.
I hate the Odin summon.
I
in this game.
hated. Oh,
I
okay, I see
hate
what you're saying.
The Odin summon.
Yeah, yeah.
It is so annoying.
Yeah.
It's the way that it works. I mean, like Final Fantasy VII or any other Final Fantasy I can think of. You summon Odin like any other summon. You go into the freaking summons and you select Odin. And you're
Yeah.
like, please kill everyone on the map for me. And it has like a 50% chance of instant death or something like that.
right.
That's generally how Odin works. In this game, that is not the case. Odin is not a GF that you junction. He just shows up randomly sometimes and kills everything for you.
And I wonder if it's because it's like late. It's very late in the game when you would be getting Odin. I guess you could get him earlier, I suppose.
I think I got him somewhere I got him somewhere around when you first get the garden. You can fly it around. And,
Oh shoot! I didn't get him till
I got him way early.
like late game. Okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe my assumption is
so-
incorrect then.
The reason why that's annoying, anytime you introduce an element of randomness,
Yeah,
I will tell you as a game creator, stop what you're doing.
stop doing it.
Punch yourself in the face. Stop. Do not introduce randomness
Yeah.
if there's any possible way to avoid
Right.
it. Because when I don't want Odin to show up, which is when I'm farming for a certain item that I'm trying to steal
you're
from
just
an
fighting a
enemy,
bunch of nothing,
or
yeah.
whatever, whatever it is. I'm fighting this enemy for a reason. I finally encountered it because the random encounters, maybe it's a low chance of reaching
Did this
this
really
enemy.
happen?
Yes.
Oh
I was
my
trying
gosh,
to fight
that
Marlboros.
sucks.
I was trying to fight Marlboros in order to get a specific item because you
Right.
need that with this in conjunction with the Solomon's Ring to get a GF. There's a GF that you can only get this way. So you have to fight Marlboros. You have to steal from them to get certain items.
Okay.
And it's like you fight, I don't know, 10 battles, and maybe 1 in 10 battles you get a Marlboro. Marlboro. It's a really hard word to say. And Odin would keep killing them.
That sucks.
It's like, yes, Marlboro, finally. And then Odin would come up and just fetch and kill it. I'm like, I don't want you here. Go away. I never want you. Not one time ever in my entire playthrough of FF8 have I ever wanted Odin to do anything.
Don't
just
get Odin.
the fetch out of here.
Don't get Odin, people.
Get out. Never get Odin again.
But here's
Odin
the
is
thing.
useless.
You sought in your arrogance to control the gods.
Yeah.
And you can't do that.
So I hate Odin. That's the point. So when you fight Seifer, if you have Odin in the party, Odin will try to attack Seifer, and Seifer kills him. Seifer kills Odin,
Wow.
which is freaking crazy. But I was very happy. I was like, yes, yes, Odin is dead. But what ends up happening is that Odin just kind of like, you essentially just swap Odin out for the Gilgamesh summon. Because then Gilgamesh comes down and finishes off Seifer. That's kind of like the end of the battle or whatever. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that as a total caveat. I hate Odin, but I think it might be the only way you can get Gilgamesh. But then I never saw Gilgamesh after that, so what does it really matter? I don't know. Whatever. The fight with Seifer, though, and more importantly, the scene with Seifer that was before this. Earlier in our podcast, I mentioned how much I liked Seifer on this playthrough.
Yeah.
That was true through Disc 1 and the very beginning of Disc 2. After that, I think they really dropped the ball with Seifer.
Really?
Because Seifer doesn't really do anything.
Right.
Past the torture scene, you don't see Seifer. He doesn't.
He's just the pre-boss to fighting the boss.
He's the pre-boss to fighting the boss at the end of Disc 2
And 3.
and at the end of Disc 3.
Yeah.
That's about it.
That's about it.
So they don't really do anything thematically with his relationship to Renoa or his rivalry with Squall.
Yeah. That's true.
It
That's
doesn't
true.
really
missed opportunity there.
amount to anything.
Yeah.
I like the scene for the Fujin and Raijin part of it, where they try to be like, yo, we can't keep following you with this, man. This isn't right. Like, please, we just want you to go back to being the old Seifer, our friend. We're going to always be a posse, but we can't follow you down the path you're going. Kind of the knight role.
Yeah,
that
they
you're
were
talking
actually
about.
trying to actually help him.
I really like the scene for that reason. Because
Me too.
I thought it was so cool that the whole game, I think it's Fujin. Fujin's the girl?
Fujin's the girl,
who
I think. Yeah.
yells one-word answers all the
Yes.
time. She
And Raijin's
actually talks. Like
more words.
A legitimate
A full
speech.
sentence, yeah.
And she actually, like,
Yeah.
normal, uncapped letters, tries to reach Seifer and talk to him.
Which you would assume was very uncomfortable for Fujin because she doesn't do that.
It shows...
There's a reason she doesn't talk that way.
It's so cool that they set her up as this trope character and then broke the trope in a moment, like you're saying, where she's being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Where it like really means something to her to say this, right? And Squall just says, no, screw you, bye then.
Right.
And that on top of what he does to Renoa after this,
Yes,
make
I
him
know.
pretty
That was-
irredeemable to me.
Yeah.
I could not get with it. I could not sympathize at all with him at this point.
Yeah.
And I really wish that they had given Seifer more screen time post Disc 1 and beginning of Disc 2 to help us understand where his mentality is at this point.
Because without understanding it, we just assume he's lost his humanity and he's just kind of totally gone off the deep end. And I don't know.
It's just a deplorable thing to do. It's so bad.
You know what's dumb too is that in the credits, or at the end scene before the credits, when they show Seifer, it's supposed to be kind of an endearing moment where they're fishing, right? And then
it's so
Raijin,
unsatisfying.
It's not at all. And also, he's still just a complete jerk because he's mad at his friends until they fall back in the ocean, and then he's happy. They just didn't really do much. His character didn't undergo a full arc. Like he underwent the beginnings of an arc, and then it just never completed, and that's really unsatisfying.
I kind of feel similarly to Seifer Endgame as I did to like Freya in Final Fantasy IX, where they started something really strong.
And it was going to be so good.
And it was really going somewhere, and then they kind of just don't do anything with it.
And it's almost like there's so many loose ends to tie up that they just don't care to make the game super long and really go into all that. Like they set themselves up with too much exposition in so many different places. They just can't possibly actually bring it all in. But for some reason they still set it up. You know.
Now, I talked about this in some addendum edits that I added into the last one that I uploaded to the main channel. It's hard for me to know how we should judge Seifer because it isn't very clear how much of the manipulation happening to him is of a magical nature.
Yes, and we talked about that a little bit, and like I was under the impression that he was more so and you thought it was maybe less so, but...
So I went back and looked at some scenes, and in the first scene where the Sorceress shows up and he's got President Delling and he's like holding... Is it Delling? I think that's the president of Galbadia's name. He's holding the gunblade to him and he's like stuck and he has no way out.
Yes.
The room, like the newsroom there's like a purple haze or mist that is sort of like flowing in that room.
I got the feeling that there was some magical influence.
And when they leave, that mist goes away. You're in the same room and the party is there, but that mist is gone. And it's subtle. But she's like saying all this stuff to him, and she's like, wave goodbye to your friends and to your childhood and to your past. And he sort of walks almost trance-like up to Squall and company, and he waves like this, and then he follows her into the like portal. And it seems a little bit like he's being magically manipulated somehow. It feels that way to me. But how long does that continue? Because Idea stops being the Sorceress at some point.
Yes, and he's still... like that. He's still doing that.
Is Ultimecia continuing that or not? It's hard to say because when Renoa bends down to Seifer at the end of Disc 2 and she like whispers, like, go get the Lunatic Pandora, and he stands up almost trance-like still, and he's like, yes, Sorceress, and it walks away. It feels like it could be.
But it doesn't make sense to be because Idea's not doing it, and then Renoa's not doing it, and Adel's out in space still. And so it would have to be Ultimecia coming from the future to just continually always be like on his shoulder behind him, controlling him.
So it's like...
I don't know if that's the case, but...
It's like how much of this, or how much of a mixture of the two, is it that he's being magically manipulated or that he's just being persuaded because of his childhood dream? He's buying into it because he wants to live out the dream. And it's hard to know.
Clear.
It's hard to know how much blame to lay on his shoulders.
Right.
Because if it's over here and it's just he just bought into his childhood dream, it was just something that came at the right opportunity, and he just fell into it, and he just decided to stick with it to the end because he felt he went too far and he couldn't go back.
Then he's a jerk.
He's awful.
He's terrible.
He's awful. He's evil.
Yeah, he's evil.
He condoned the missile strike on Balamb.
Right.
He gave. Renoa to Adel to be merged into like a single being in this like grotesque, like
that was pretty screwed up.
Messed up thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that's like super messed up.
And he has no remorse. He never shows any remorse for
Never shows remorse
anything.
For it. Not one time. And so I guess my whole point is...
This isn't the Seifer that clapped for Squall when he became a Seed.
Exactly.
It's a different person.
Yes. And if it is he's being magically manipulated, that needs to be more clear. If it is that he has sort of, that's how it started, but over time he has sort of just accepted that role, I would have liked to see the evolution.
Yeah,
I would have liked to see the moments that he sort of degrades in his arc.
Yeah.
Right? Like where he sort of becomes this evil villain person.
Right.
And if that's the case, it's very unsatisfying that he gets away and gets to go fishing with his friends in the end. And
then
nothing happens.
In the end, he's still just like a jerk.
There's no consequence.
Yeah.
There's nothing amounts. There's nothing that happens. That's not to say that in real life evil people don't get away with things. It's to say that we're telling a story here. What is it that we're trying to say with Seifer, with this character? And what anagram, not anagram, but what parallel are we drawing to some kind of theme or moral or whatever in the real world? What are we trying to say with this character?
Yeah.
And it feels like it kind of ends up being that they're saying nothing.
They're saying nothing, yeah.
Which is like why I'm confused as to why so many people felt that the intro sequence with setting up Squall and Seifer's rivalry was so important to the story somehow. I don't get why people feel that way. This is not Final Fantasy Tactics or something, where Ramza and Delita's relationship is like the key theme to the whole story working. It's like the crux. It's like Delita and Ramza are like, that's what the story is, really. That's not the case for like Seifer Squall at all. So I was just really disappointed in what they do with Seifer in the end of the story.
Well, the way that he's included in that ending cinematic, it makes you think that at least the directors of the game want you to think that Seifer's a good person.
Yeah.
Right. That in a weird way, I didn't like it, but the fact that he's included in that at all.
That he makes it out, it's okay.
That it's like, yeah, he's okay.
You're supposed to be okay
and
with
he's having fun with his friends, yeah. And it would, so to that end, we can kind of infer what the artist's intent was. It was to have a full arc character that you came to understand by the end.
Yeah.
And so now that we understand what their intent was, we can criticize
Sure.
and say whether it worked or not. And I don't believe it worked by the end.
I didn't like it.
Yeah.
So anyways, after that, you fight Adel. I kind of like how, Renoa's merged with her. So if you attack Renoa and Renoa dies, it's a game over. Right. So you have to just hit the Adel, just the single target spells, or like you can't multi-target spell. You have to be careful not to hit Renoa, or else you'll get a game over. So there's an HP bar for Renoa that's separate from Adel. That was kind of a cool moment. And then the time compression begins, and you fight all those different sorceresses from all the different time periods. It's kind of like showing all this, all of time is being compressed into a singular moment. It's kind of cool. You get to Ultimecia's castle. As a final dungeon, I kind of liked it. It's unique. It's interesting. I like it. I always like it when they split a party into two. And this party has to do this thing, and this party has to do this thing.
Yeah. Well, you have to lower the. Anyways, that's fun.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And the final boss, Ultimecia, is a pretty good final boss. Yeah. I especially like the design of the ultimate version
final form
of Ultimecia.
Like the scorpion looking
with the hollow face.
Yes, yeah.
And those huge creepy. Almost like antlers.
That was weird,
it's a cool final boss design. I really like it. I'll probably use it.
Creepy.
I'll probably use it on the thumbnail for this one because it's just a cool design. I really like it. But in any case, you defeat her, and then everyone's trying to figure out how to escape from time compression. And my interpretation, at least, is that Renoa and friends are able to sort of recover each other, bring each other back into existence, return to their own time. Timeline is recovered, compression stops. And this is all kind of seen in that final little video, camcorder video sequence.
Which I really liked. I want to talk about that later.
Yeah, talk about it now, because...
Well, I want to talk about it later.
Okay.
Because we got to figure the thing out. So, because Squall, what I found fascinating is that everyone kind of figured out where to go.
Yeah.
But Squall can't be there with everyone else. He needs somebody, he needs help, right? And then that's kind of the central theme of the game. But he does go there. He's just in the wrong time, because this is when he goes and sees his younger self. And this is when he goes and sees Matron get the sorceress power passed on to her. So he thought of the place, but he has too many memories at that place. Like Renoa can think of that place, and she's only been there since she's known Squall, as far as we know. And so she can be there in an easier way. Squall has so many memories tied to that place that when he thinks of it, he ends up going to a different point in time, a different place, and he ends up experiencing something, super different, and then he gets lost again. But either way, Rinoa, shows up to help him out and to rescue him, basically. And I really liked Eyes on Me. I liked the song at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it works so well at the end, the vocalized track,
Yeah.
But yeah, so as it relates to the home video, that's when you see Idea and Sid together, which was huge. Zell is freaking hilarious. Like, what was...
Finally gets his hot dogs and he's freaking
he
choking
eats
on them.
way too many of them. Then he gets mad at everyone else. Like, why are you filming me? He gets so mad. But we don't, the question mark is Squall and Rinoa, and there's like an ending credits scene. There's like a scene after.
So the credits are going on through this whole camcorder sequence, right? And then it kind of seems like it's fading away. And Rinoa's out on the balcony.
Yeah.
It's a battery, right? And it's like she's out on the balcony talking to someone.
Yeah.
But the camcorder's battery goes out before you can find out who it is.
Oh man, don't worry, they'll show you.
Then,
they use that as a kind of a transition out of camcorder and into just cinematic,
Yeah.
But yeah, Squall's there and he's there with Rinoa, and this is the first, Squall, I don't know if this is a good time to bring up kind of what I thought of before to talk about here. But Squall doesn't interact much with Rinoa, just the two of them, outside of that place where he's like, I'll be waiting here for you. And right when he rescues her, basically ever since he finally has made up his mind and he's like decided what he's doing, and after he breaks her out of prison, right? And they talk a little bit, but not like very much, right? Mm-hmm. This is the first time that they're comfortable, that he's like super comfortable around her, other than, when they were like, hey, I'll meet you here. I felt like it was really good. It was really powerful. Eyes on Me is Julia, right? That's Julia song
wrote the
about
song
Laguna.
About Laguna.
But so much of it kind of is relevant to Squall and Rinoa as well.
It's like that love that never came to be, right? Is sort of like realized in their children.
In them, yeah, exactly.
Because Laguna went on to marry Rain,
right.
And Rain and Laguna's son is Squall.
Yeah.
Julia went on to marry General Caraway.
Caraway, that was it.
Their daughter was Rinoa.
Yeah.
So it's like this love that she lost, or Julia, lost, is sort of finds itself again in the next generation.
Yeah.
Kind of a deal. Yeah.
And so my initial thinking is, I know the history of the song, but still, it seems like it was written for them. But the fact that they're singing a song about Laguna and Julia, at this point, like you just mentioned, it can still have some significance, but I almost wonder if that song was, this game was supposed to be half Laguna, half Squall.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like that song, like they liked it, so they kept it, but it was meant more for Laguna than Squall.
Been more for Laguna than Squall.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But it fits for both. Like, it really does work for both.
I do think Uematsu has said in interviews that Eyes on Me was written for Squall and Rinoa, but I mean, in the game's world,
it feels that way.
Julia wrote it
for Laguna.
But
Nobuo Uematsu, non-diegetically, yeah, that's funny. Okay. Anyways, that song is very good, and it kind of fits. There's a few things she says, like your face that is never down, and it's like, hey, that doesn't fit Squall as much.
Yeah, but it could fit Rinoa.
Oh, true. That's true.
Because Laguna was kind of the
that's true.
The real emotional, lively one.
Yeah.
And Julia was the more serious
in love
girl.
Yeah.
And Rain was that way too. Rain was the real serious
yeah.
person in that relationship, and Laguna was
we see that too. We see Laguna remembering some past memory of when he and Rain got married.
Yeah.
That was
so it's like
cinematic.
Squall's personality more mirrors Rain or Julia's.
Yeah.
And Rinoa's personality more mirrors Laguna's.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of a reversal.
Okay, so then it would be about the other, and then it fits perfectly.
But yeah, you finally do see that Squall's there on the balcony.
Yeah.
They share a kiss as the camera pans away, pulls out. into the distance, and the garden flies, and you see them.
It's beautiful.
In the moon.
It's
great,
really cool.
great final shot.
And then at the end, I love how they say the end, and it's like a 1930s black and white silent, 1920s black and white silent film. And it's like the end with the little designs and Final Fantasy VIII.
Yep.
And that was, I guess, a throwback to Laguna's movie. But
Yeah, it's good stuff.
it's good stuff. So that's the whole game. That's the whole
There it
game.
is. We've made it to the end of the game.
And
So
I really, really, really did like the game.
what would you say upon this playthrough was Final Fantasy VIII's greatest strength and its greatest weakness? How would you wrap those two things up?
I think the greatest strength was the characters, just in general, the character development. I was very, and this is something that I may as well just talk about it now. I was very critical in the last episode about Squall and his character development, and how I felt as though when he was rescuing Renault the first time out in outer space, that we had gotten this incredible character development in Squall. But then as soon as they get to the Ragnarok, he just immediately goes back to what he was, right? And I think I understand why they did that now, because I've thought about this a lot since.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, but it's all about keeping the characters as consistent as they can, right? And they did such a good job with the characters. And like if for instance, because I think it all comes down to Squall does not hug Renoa when she asks to be hugged.
Yeah.
That actually made me upset. Like I was mad.
Yeah.
And it made me not like Squall, and it also made me not want to like Squall. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because the stakes of that scene were just so high.
Yeah.
To have the culmination of this high stakes situation, not just in, the planet being destroyed in Adel's return, but also saving this girl's life who was floating out in the middle of nowhere, and who this guy has spent days trying to like revive from death, and to have it result in him being like, I'm not gonna hug you. You crazy? Like, what's that all about? But I've thought about it so much more since then, and I actually think that there is some weird beauty to be found here, because one of the things that I try to do is see if find out like what you've been doing with the intro. How could it have been better?
Sure.
Right? And my initial thought was, just have him hug her when she has to be hugged.
Yeah.
That was my obvious response, right? Or have him change the autopilot to avert and not do the thing.
Try to not take her down.
But I immediately found there are two huge problems with both of those. He can't just hug her after that. He can't do it.
Yeah.
And
he's not ready.
There are so
He's
many
not
reasons
open
for
enough
it.
yet.
And remember what you mentioned before in I think episode 2, Squall doesn't even shake people's hands. Nope. He refuses every single time. And so here's somebody who wants a hug, and in the moment, Squall will do it. I feel as if they didn't have the spacesuits when he rescued her, that was a hug waiting to happen. It was going to happen. Nothing was going to stop it from happening, right? Because that was the moment. Those were the emotions. That's what he was feeling, and it was going to happen. But they created a world where they have to have spacesuits.
Yeah.
And they mirrored our world where you have to have a spacesuit. Otherwise, the stakes wouldn't have been as high, because if she was floating out in space, but she didn't need a spacesuit because the world doesn't need suits, then she's not going to die. That means she can breathe, and she'll find her way back eventually, something. And so they had to have spacesuits on to keep the stakes high, but then you can't have your incredible pinnacle moment be a hug with spacesuits on with the thing. That's why Renoa says, now the spacesuits are off. Let's
they were
have a hug.
In the way.
Yeah,
right?
they were in the way before. But the moment is over. The moment has passed. They're already now looking for what to do next now, right? Mm-hmm. So he can't hug her, but she has to ask for the hug. Because I was like, well, maybe she doesn't need to ask for the hug. Mm-hmm. No, she has to, because she's been asleep this whole time. Yep. What did she do right before she fell asleep, before the battle with Edea? During a massive battle, she was like, hey, Squall, I made a new ring, and we have matching rings. Isn't that cool? That's what she was doing during this crazy situation right before she fell asleep. As far as she knows, she just woke up.
She's been trying real hard up to that point to see if there can be something that can bloom between them. She's flirting hardcore.
And literally, as far as she knows, she fell asleep, woke up, and Squall is like there. He's like loving her. And so, and that's assuming she wasn't super conscious while she was being taken over. She may have been to some extent, but for the most part, she was just passed out, right? Yeah. And so she hasn't had character development the way Squall has, because her character hasn't really changed. And so she has to ask for a hug. Like, she needs to make this moment romantic in her own mind, that she has to do it. So you can't have her not ask for a hug. But Squall can't give her that hug because you already missed the opportunity for the pinnacle romantic moment. You missed it because they were wearing spacesuits. You can't have that be the romantic moment. Squall needs to save her, and she needs to fall into his arms as he saves her in an epic moment of maximum impact.
The Sorceress memorial scene.
Yes, that scene. And see, but last time we talked, I made the mistake. I said the pinnacle is the Ragnarok cockpit scene.
Yeah.
But I'm wrong. The pinnacle is actually the memorial scene.
Yes.
But me assuming because they played the song and it just seemed like that was the moment. But the moment is when he saves her, not the first time with the spacesuit, but when his character arc isn't done yet. It's still moving because he learned how to deal with his own emotions, but he has not yet learned how to deal with his own emotions, including a living, breathing
I would
person.
say he became aware of the problem with his emotions.
Okay, sure.
But he had not yet
He had
crossed
not yet
the threshold
actually-
of actually being
Yes.
able to open up yet.
So he could admit it to himself,
Yes.
but he still doesn't want to talk about it
Yes.
to other people,
Yes.
like who are listening, you know?
That-
And so,
we talked about that. I don't know how long my explanation was to try to explain what you just said in one
And
sentence,
I-
but that is it.
and it's so funny because I spent 30 minutes explaining my position and you were doing yours, and it makes sense, but I just needed to understand that he could not hug her then, because that was the moment that soured me.
Yes.
I'm okay with the cockpit scene. I'm even okay with her being like, I guess she has to go to prison. I don't like it, but I don't know what else to do.
Yes.
I'm okay with that. It's the fact that he refused to hug a
Yes.
helpless girl who for days he's been
just
trying to revive.
Couldn't emotionally handle
He couldn't do it,
yet.
but he could have in space when it happened.
Yes.
He could have done it.
Yes.
But it's like once it's been a while and then, okay, now take off your suits. Okay, now let's hug. I'm just not feeling the moment
it doesn't
anymore.
feel organic. It feels forced. And he
now-
starts reverting in again.
Me personally, yeah, I would have hugged her, but we're understanding the character,
Yes.
right? And Squall, yeah, he's gone back into himself. He's retreated a little, and my initial thought was they just erased all the character development that they had done up to that point. But what I see now is that his development just wasn't done yet.
Yes.
You need to be patient with Final Fantasy VIII, and this is because a lot of people had criticisms where I did. But this is the actual pinnacle is when he actually really saves her. Because you may think that he just saved her in the spacesuit, but she's still. The sorceress thing is still a problem.
It's still a problem.
It's still, and there is no
she's not
resolution
out of
to
the
that
woods
yet.
yet.
She's not out of the woods yet. So he hasn't completely saved her yet. So anyways, this is long-winded, but I'm coming around to what you were saying in that podcast because it actually does make more sense. And in the story, I'm sure that there were writers who were like, why is Squall not hugging? And Katase or somebody would have said, no, they cannot hug until that moment. It would devalue the moment where they finally come together in the sorcerers in the memorial.
In the memorial.
If Squall was let it down and just gave her a hug whenever she asked for it, right then. And that's why even when he knew that she was going to be taken hostage, or taken prisoner, he kneels down next to her, but he still doesn't like completely give himself up yet, right?
Yes.
He's not ready yet.
Yes.
And he does become ready, but he needs his friends' help to convince him. Anyways,
which is all part of
this
you
stuff.
have to have friends.
He needs it.
You
yes.
need people.
And he doesn't
right?
even just need the girl, he needs other people other than just the girl to help him out
He
to
needs
realize himself.
The whole group. He needs friends. He needs her. He needs
It
others.
all
in
comes
his heart.
together. And
Yes.
so I was thinking if he set the if he canceled autopilot and then this was their ship now and they just started going around and then we miss this memorial moment.
Yeah.
And you need that moment because otherwise you just have the spacesuit moment and that's not good enough for pinnacle romanticism. That's not good enough. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the peak of what this can be. And then it's not good enough if he just hugs her because it devalues what then comes later. And it kind of it's not where he's at. And then also, what was the other one? Oh, and she has to ask for it. Anyways, there's so many things that come together, and I kept trying to think, what if this was different? And basically, my conclusion is the way it was done is the way it needed to be.
Yeah.
And that's hard, and a lot of people out there who think like I do or did, there's a lot of people who don't like Final Fantasy VIII because of Squall and Renault's relationship.
Sure.
You do have to be patient with Squall, and that is just a fact. He is not easily manipulated or motivated or anything. He needs to do things on his own time, and that does require patience on Renault's part and on your part, the game player. But the payoff does come, but my issue, I guess, I just got soured when he wouldn't hug her, because who wouldn't do that?
Right. That's
just me.
That's the divisive element of Squall is
very
those
divisive.
who are like him
Yeah.
get it. And those
Right.
who are not can't understand the coldness.
It was hard.
It's hard to
Yeah.
understand or like him.
Yeah.
I get him, I guess, just intuitively. And so
the writers may have, I wouldn't even say they made a mistake. They just made a choice to write a character that half of all people will not understand ever, forever, unless they really like what I do, unless they really dive into the analysis.
This is why Laguna exists.
But then
in the
they
story.
took out Laguna for the most of the
You're right.
story.
That's beautifully said.
Okay, so
well done.
I just wanted to throw that out there now. I have come around on my thinking to what Mike was saying, and I was probably a little bit too overly critical. I still think the lunar cry didn't need to be a laser. It could have just been a drop, right? Like that makes sense. A tear. It could have just been a drop of monsters
and it could
that
have
splashes on the surface.
There was someone who brought up.
Still
there was
carries
somebody who
Adel
brought
down.
up something that I thought was an interesting.
I saw the comment, like 10 or 12
12
monsters,
like bosses,
like big ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Like almost like weapons from Final Fantasy VII or something.
Yeah.
If it was that instead of billions. of monsters, it might.
I feel like they just
be
set
more
the stakes too high.
It might be more renderable on the world map. You could visually show the impact these things are having.
Because you might be saying, oh, why try to minimize what was an otherwise really cool scene?
Yeah.
But it's like you've got to deliver. You can't just promise and not deliver. You have to make your delivery live up to the promise. And the promise can't be too big if you aren't capable of delivering that big.
Right.
You just shouldn't do that. And to some extent, I felt that with Squall too. I was like, they promised a character development in him. Where is it? He won't hug her. I didn't get that. But he can't. Anyways, I just can't emphasize that enough. As much as I tried to think my way around it, he could not have done it at that moment, because even if he did break down and hug her, or if his character was fully developed now and he was no longer like that, then the line that you mentioned in the last podcast where she predicts when he's going to say whatever.
Yeah.
His whatever saying would be done. He wouldn't be saying that to her if his character development arc was full.
Finished, yeah.
And you would have missed that moment as well. Her still understanding how he's thinking, and he's still holding back from her. He still doesn't want to tell her things. Yeah. So you would have missed all that if we decided to do things a different way. And it would have just changed too many things. It would have made it slightly less impactful at the end. So I wanted to throw that in there because I feel like that is a hinge moment in the game that a lot of people do or don't like. Disc 3 just in general. And that is, there is tremendous value to be seen there if you're not seeing it.
What's awesome about this is that you, who were the critic of the scene before, just defended it about 1,000,000 times better than I did as the advocate for the scene last time.
I've had a month to think about it, though. You were trying to think on your toes. I have had a month to think about this, you know?
All right. So, getting back to greatest strength and weakness.
Yes.
Greatest strength
Characters
is
and character development.
Character development.
Massively
What do you think
done.
is the greatest weakness of the game?
Greatest weakness, that's a good question. I would just say in some ways, the like unfinished plot lines, unfinished exposition, over-promising in certain ways and under-delivering in the end. They did not do that in characters, which is why it's so good. But they did do that in so many other elements of this game. The promises were up there, and the delivery was not.
Yeah.
And so,
So for me, I would say similarly, my favorite aspect, or the part that I thought was the strongest, was character dynamic. Like the way these characters
interact with
played with each other. The character play within scenes. Laguna and Ward and Kyros, or Squall and Zell and Sophie. Like any combination. There was just great stuff happening. Funny, sad, romantic, urgent. It was just like I was always engaged with the characters all the time.
Yeah, me too.
And
I feel like I knew them really well.
Yeah, the way that they played off of each other just made for really dynamic, interesting scenes. So I really, really love that about Final Fantasy VIII. I think its greatest weakness is that it hides almost all of its hints around the plot instead of inside it. It's too vague, and it relies on you searching the info section in the menu. It relies on you talking.
What's the Ultimecia book?
The Ultimecia book. It relies on talking to every NPC multiple times
Yes,
to
yeah.
try and like
Through each disc, yeah.
to find all the answers.
Yeah.
Now, some people will consider that a strength. I admit this is just my own feeling. It's just my own kind of subjective feeling on style, right? Some people like it because you can play the game again and again and again and find new tidbits that open up your understanding of the game more and more and more. This is what we've played the game multiple times. This is like my 5th playthrough of it.
We could probably do another whole podcast series about Final Fantasy VIII again,
and
it'll be
discover
just
all
as
kinds
long.
of new things
Yeah,
the next time that we didn't this time.
Yeah.
That is a very valid reason for people to appreciate doing it this way.
Yeah.
I just find it frustrating because I think that most people aren't going to do that. Most people are not going to play the game twice or 3 times or 5 times. They're going to play it once, and they're going to come up with their opinion on their first impression of it. And if it's not good, they won't have a reason to play it again. Right? They'll dismiss it. They're not finding the great meat that is there.
This is a
because
very
it's
good game.
hidden too well. And so, like a lot of their audience, it's lost. It goes over their head. Even the people who love it, which is most of the audience watching this podcast, they're saying, I never knew that. I had no idea. This is changing my whole perspective. Like, I could not
I'm
believe
seeing that in the comments,
all of these things that it's given me a new appreciation.
So many people
for
are
this game.
saying, wow, I should pick this game up again.
Yeah, I want to play it again.
That's the whole point.
I think depending on what our next game ends up being that we analyze, if it ends up being Mass Effect, it'll be interesting to look at how it uses its codec for world building versus how Final Fantasy VIII used its info menu, or how maybe Final Fantasy 13 uses its, what do they call them in that? I just forgot.
I don't remember 13.
Anyways, the journal entries that like you basically the whole story is like in those instead of like in the cutscenes. But I just feel like the story, and what I think solidifies my feeling on this is that there's so many people in our comments section who are saying, holy cow, this has really changed my perspective on Final Fantasy VIII.
I had no idea.
I have learned to appreciate it so much more after the podcast.
We're getting tons of those.
So many, I mean so many people miss these details. It's just, if they had hidden those hints in the cutscenes and in the plot, instead of around it with NPC optional dialogue or in the info menu in the tutorial section, I feel
or
like
back at the computer in your classroom,
in the computer in the
which
classroom,
people may not think to check.
If they had not done that, then this game would have been not quite as divisive as it was.
Yeah, I think so.
I feel like it would have been more widely sort of accepted. I'm not saying it fixes all of its problems by any means, because it doesn't. But it solves a big one, which is most people just didn't understand what was going on. They didn't they felt like the payoffs were not set up and that they came out of nowhere. And if they had just been set up better, I think the game would have been more well received.
Yeah,
so
I think that's true.
That's my greatest strength and weakness of Final Fantasy VIII. So, for this last section, as we wrap up our podcast here on FF8, we're going to move into responding to a few comments. Now, before we do that, there have been a lot of people who have requested that we speak on some of the fan theories, like Squall is dead.
Squall. We brought that up in episode 1.
So I ended up cutting that out.
Oh, that's right.
Of the version that went on the main channel.
That's right.
And I did that because I agreed there was some criticism about how I went about talking about that. And I agreed that I was just probably too dismissive. Right? I'm gonna explain why I am that way about fan theories in a minute, but if I'm going to be that way, I might as well not talk about it, is probably the truth.
Fair enough.
Right? If we're not going to give it like a really thorough sort of like look, then we might as well not look at it.
Sure.
If we're just going to sit there and make fun of the thing, we might as well not talk about it.
I think you're right.
So,
at the same time, though, we're here to analyze the game, and the fan theories are peripheral. I mean,
that's how I feel.
They're there, but they're not integral to the game necessarily.
Yes. So, here's the thing. Here's just the honest truth. I am not saying that anybody out there who enjoys theory crafting and fan theories that you should feel bad about that, the fact that you enjoy it or you get into it. There's a channel we used to watch a lot. I still watch him a lot, from time to time. Final Fantasy Peasant. This is pretty much what his channel is.
He does a lot of that.
He does theory craft.
It's the reading between the lines.
And he's really good at it.
Yeah.
Like, I would say, like, of all of the FF community people, like, I enjoy watching his videos, despite the fact that I don't even enjoy theory crafting. Because
Right.
I think he comes up with better explanations sometimes than the actual like writers of the story do. In particular with Final Fantasy 15.
With 15 specifically, he had some really good
some cool
insights,
ideas and what he thought maybe they would do in DLC. But here's
or what he thought was cut from the game. There's some theories about that too.
Here's my core problem with with just theory crafting in general. I watched the disappointment in his community when the DLCs came out or further explanation came out, and the explanation was so much less like satisfying than what they had come up with. And they were like, oh my gosh, like this is not as cool as what we had thought of, right? I don't like to theory craft because Square Enix and a lot of people making movies or TV shows or whatever that open a lot of mysteries or making, they tend to want to subvert expectations. And they are watching what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think they very mistakenly make they see that you came to that conclusion, and maybe there were great hints or setups to that being the case, but if too many people start getting on board with that, they can't surprise you anymore by going that direction. So they feel like they have to try to do a different thing in order to surprise the audience, because that's more important to them than just telling a good story with a satisfying resolution to this mystery. I think that this was true of Lost, the TV show. Yeah. And I think it's true of a lot of what we see in the Kitase-led Final Fantasy projects. Yeah. There's a lot of mystery box type storytelling, vague on purpose. I believe it was Tetsuya Nomura who said in it's on the DVD bonus features of the Japanese Advent Children release.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about, and I don't have the quote in front of me, but basically like, we're not trying to do like the Hollywood thing where they give you all the answers. And he alludes to the fact that they want the fans to talk about
They want communities on forums to ask questions and to dig.
They are incentivizing theory crafting. But then as soon as you come up with your cool theory, they're going to try to subvert it. To surprise you. And I think that it inherently leads to people being disappointed in the next part when it comes, or in the real explanation when it comes. Right?
Because it's usually not.
How much energy goes into someone creating a Squall is dead theory to have it be squashed when Kitase says that was never in our minds and that's not the intention, that's totally wrong.
Right.
That's a bad feeling. You're setting yourself up for being disappointed by putting that much energy into a really cool theory. So this is the major reason why I don't like to get into theory crafting myself or into reading other fan fiction or fan theories. Because most of them are probably, I would say 99% of them are wrong. And
they end up being.
Even if there is one or two out there that is really cool, I actually legitimately liked the one you came up with about time compression. I think that makes the story better, right?
Yeah.
So I can see why people cling to one. It's like, this makes the story better for me. I'm going to accept this as my headcanon or whatever. That's fine. I'm not telling you you're wrong for doing that. I'm just saying I don't like doing it.
Right.
Long way of saying...
We aren't going to be talking about it.
We're not going to talk about it. Because I don't want to be dismissive.
Yeah.
I don't want to...
Don't want to make fun.
Rain on anyone's parade.
Yeah.
And I don't want to just like... basically just be a downer on it when this is a way for a lot of people to legitimately enjoy the game more.
Yeah.
But I personally do not find either of those theories to make the game better for me.
Right.
If Renoa is Ultimecia, I feel the game is made worse for it. If Squall is dead, I think the story is made worse for it. That's my feeling on it. If there is, I mean, a huge ask and demand in the comments of this video for us to talk about it,
In a separate video.
we will consider doing one extra bonus episode strictly on the fan theories.
And why they're wrong.
I am
Just kidding, I
warning
didn't
you.
say that.
No, I'm warning you that that's going to be the conclusion we come to, because I'm not convinced of them. I don't think that they make the
jeez.
story better. I don't think that they were intended. I know for a fact they weren't, because Kitase said they weren't.
Right.
I don't. I don't even think that they make the story. They don't fix the story's problems for me.
Okay.
Can that be an okay answer for now? Can you guys accept that? Like, I apologize, but like, that's just not what I'm about. Go to Peasant. Peasant will give you all of that, and he's way better at it than I can be. He's way better at it than I can be. Go to him. Go to people who like theory crafting. Whoever else. But I'm sorry that I can't be your theory crafting guy. I just can't. That's not who I am.
All
Were you
right.
going to say something about that?
No more need be
Okay.
said. Let's
right.
move on.
All right, so I'm going to read some comments here. There's been some good stuff over the course of these videos. This first one comes from Levi Whitley, looks like. Can you go away, please? I don't want you. Get out of here. All right. He says, a lot of your criticisms of the story deal with the characters making bad choices or acting childish. I think the choices in dialogue are pretty realistic given the characters' ages and also the target audience. Sure, it's a fantasy setting where mercenaries are trained in a school in their early teens, but I like that they still have certain immaturities because they are still adolescents. Why not make them all age 30 if you want them to have good plans or adult motivations? So I feel like we kind of answered this, but maybe we weren't clear enough. So we've given the caveat many times. These are kids.
Yes.
So they're going to be immature.
One of the things that I remember from early on is it felt like a kid wrote the script, the story for this game.
Right.
Not so much just that they're acting like kids, but that it felt like the story was written by children at times, not the whole thing always.
Thought it all the way through.
Yes, just like, oh, this would be interesting, let's throw this in there. That's not always the case, but there are certain points where I think we did make that observation.
But there's still, like, the one place that I can think of where I just really can't meet you in the middle on this is the battle against Galbadia Garden. Because, like, I think we tried to make this point with, like, the soldiers who fought on the beach and
Yeah, they were like 18 and 19.
those were young kids.
Yeah. Some kids were 17. They lied about their age in order to get drafted.
Yeah, we're not.
Yeah.
We cannot pretend that seeing a person get ripped apart by a fetching grenade or something is going to lead to you having a flirty romantic sequence 30 feet over here.
Yeah,
It's just
the romanticization
not going
of
to
war.
happen.
Yeah.
Like that scene where Squall and Renoa run past all those people dying in the fight, and then they sit there and they have like a 5-minute flirty conversation where she's like, like that's I don't care what age you are. I don't care if you're 30 or 5 or it does not matter.
No.
That has an effect on people.
Right.
Seeing that. Your friends, people that you know,
when
dying.
a bomb goes off near you, not only do you feel the shockwave, it can like cause your hearing to go out. Like it's so shocking. It's a bigger deal than what they made.
It's not even just an emotionally immature person is not going to just be unaffected.
Yes,
by
bombs,
up close
and death.
carnage of that kind.
Blood. Yeah,
I cannot excuse the temperament of Zell and Renoa and Irvine in that scene. It's just not right. It's just not how I am not convinced, or I do not believe that even a child would act that way in that moment.
They would handle it worse than someone older. They would be less
traumatized more.
Exactly. They would be more likely to just go hide under a rock until it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I can't back off on that one. Now,
But,
if we're talking
there
about,
may be some fair criticism.
if we're talking about, if we're talking about the way that the forest owls plop on the floor to do their plans, sure.
Sure.
I think that that's beneficial to the story because Squall calls them out for that.
Right.
Right. Like, yeah, these are kids trying to lead a resistance movement. That's about how you would expect it to go.
Yes.
So, like, it's totally fine there. I just really hated it in the Galbadia versus Balamb garden scene.
Yeah.
I just feel like it really didn't fit.
Yeah. Fair enough.
All right, this one comes from Nathan Kim. At first, I was like, ain't no way in hell I'm going to listen to hours of FF8 podcasts. Now I need to listen to part 4. You guys did an excellent job. I don't know why I copied that over. As much as maybe to say,
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm really glad that people have enjoyed this format.
Yeah, we enjoy it. We enjoy it. I don't know if you can tell. I hope you can tell from our conversation that we enjoy this. We enjoy talking to each other about this, and it's fun.
I feel like we've hit a stride with this that is going to carry us a really long way into the future of our content.
Yeah.
And I want to thank all of you guys for watching and supporting.
Yeah.
Because you've convinced me that it's strong enough to be brought to the main channel, to be featured more, and for us to do it with a lot more games moving forward.
Because even though, like, you do make your analysis videos and they're good, they're deep, they're shorter, they're limited in scope. I mean, we're talking, what is this? This is going to be like 12 hours of Final Fantasy VIII analysis, pure analysis every minute. And that is, like, who would have known that there was any demand for that, let alone, all you guys that are watching. So thank you.
So this one comes from Locania or Locania. I'm not sure when you're going to talk about the lore of Hyne in this series, but I wanted to pose a theory about him and the Sorceress lineage that I posed to lore way back. So I want to say that I read your theory. I'm not going to bring it up because it's like several paragraphs here. I kind of already addressed my feelings about fan theories,
just in general,
but I do think that we need to take a second to talk about the lore
because
of
Hyne is a historical figure within the actual game.
So I was a little confused at first why so many people were asking us to talk about Hyne. There was like a lot of requests to talk about Hyne. And I think it's because they want us to theory craft about Hyne.
Oh, geez.
Because there's not really that much
other than
in the game
this was like the
Hyne.
early first sorceress that selected women to pass on power.
The first time they mention Hyne is, again, optional, of course. It's in the house next door to Zell's house. But you have to do it before you do the Dalit mission.
Oh, really?
You have to go in there, and there's like an older man who's like telling his granddaughter the story about Hyne.
Whoa.
And he more or less explains the current myth within the world, what they believe about it now, which is Hyne was like a god of Final Fantasy VIII's world who created human beings for some purpose. They were making or building something, and he went to go to sleep. And when he woke up, people had populated to such an insane degree. He was like, well, there's way too many fetching people. And so he started like taking away their children, kind of like killing them off. Right. And this led to a huge war between Hyne and like human beings.
Right.
And human beings ended up kind of subduing him. And so he made a promise that he would split half of his body. So like half of his power is what that's supposed to be, that he would give to humans, and then he would, keep his other half to like supplicate them.
Right.
What he didn't tell them is that the half that he gave them was completely useless. But the other half, where he kept all his power, is the power. It became the power that is passed into sorceresses.
Right.
So like Hyne's power is passed from sorceress to sorceress to sorceress. And that's where the sorceresses, that's like the origin of sorceresses in this world. That is the extent of Hyne's legend in this world that we know of in the text that's in the game, or really even in what they explain in Ultimecia. There's just not that much about it. The second time that you see anyone talking about it, again optional, is when you go to the White Seed ship and you go to like, what do you call it, like the nose of the ship?
Oh, yeah.
There's a seed, like a female seed there with 2 kids. And again, you have to do it at the right time, because if you go there right when you enter the seed ship and you just hook around and talk to them, they won't say anything about Hyne. But if you go through like the whole sequence and you talk to everybody and you're ready to leave the White Seed ship, and then you go talk to her, I think it triggers this scene where she's telling them about Hyne, and she more or less says the same thing. Now, there's some speculation about whether or not Hyne is actually a god or not, or whether he's just a powerful wizard or something, but it's not really that relevant, because I don't know. It's just like,
We
this
just
is the
don't know.
origins of
We
the
don't know
sorceress's power. That's
Right.
that's basically all you get
Like there
out
was
of
an ancient sorceress-ish type person that lived a long time ago, and that's, I mean, there you go.
Yeah. So, you know, I'll read just this next little bit so that you can get an idea of like why people like to discuss about this. He says, I pose that the stronger a sorceress is, the more blood of Hynes they have in their veins, and the longer they spend with that power and blood, the more they resemble Hyne. So this is like why Adel, for instance, is like more evil
And looks
than another.
very
Oh, by the way, I don't know if you
unique
saw
and
this.
different. I
don't
saw
know.
your addendum.
So
I
did you
see that.
see the video
I-
clips I used
yes.
where you could see that it's body armor?
I did not in the
PlayStation version?
in the SD version, not the HD.
It's
In
harder
the
to
original
see
version,
that.
it just they all look like tattoo thingies. You know, it doesn't look like, but I did see that.
Yeah. So it's like metal, a metal
Yes.
textured body armor.
I
That's
like you
hooking
put
around.
tattoo armor, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, that's true. That's true.
So, anyways,
Armor. It's the most useless
the
armor in
reason
the world.
the reason why we haven't really talked about this much is because I can't see how it is like terribly relevant to the thematic core of FF8
Right.
as much as it is just kind of like background information. But the game itself and even the Ultimecia doesn't offer much on this. It's kind of just Hyne's power is where got passed into sorceresses. I mean, this is kind of a cool idea that like the more of Hyne's power you have in you, the more evil you are or something, right? I guess that could explain it, but I don't think it really contextualizes anything to a degree to where it's like, oh, okay, that makes this plot point make more sense, or this adds to the game's theme somehow. So, again, I apologize that I can't be a great theory crafter or a discusser of
Or
theories.
theory discusser.
It's just not for me. So, okay, so we have Eikichi Onizuka.
Eikichi.
Eikichi Onizuka. I love your analysis of the basketball court scene. Very valid points of criticism levied. However, I think the characters resigning themselves to fate immediately makes sense. They're all mercenaries trained since childhood and are thus conditioned to behave like this. Since Liberi Fatali is literally fated children or children of fate, I think this behavior is meant to solidify this theme. I think it's perfectly rational for Rinoa to be the objecting voice, since she's an outsider that was recently brought into the fold. I get where you're coming from. I do.
I wouldn't go so far to say perfectly rational. I wouldn't go
Yes.
there. But there is some element of fate. They can't change it, and they're doing what they're doing. I mean, there's something
But
there.
like, Squall tries to defy fate in saving Rinoa.
Basically, many times. Yeah.
Like,
he often.
I don't think that it's that they are that there's never how am I trying to say this? I don't think that the characters have an attitude of just resigning themselves to fate, and that's tied to the theme. I think they are fated, and that's part of the theme. But I don't necessarily think that them like immediately just resigning themselves to fate is part of the thematic core, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, Squall does try to change fate in the story.
Yes. Yep.
So, I don't know. Like, again, I can kind of see what you mean, but I'm not convinced that they would just be immediately okay with killing their matron. That they wouldn't have any reservation or any
Especially
hesitation.
right in that moment. Like maybe if they took some days and thought on it and said, you know, we really have to
Came
still
around
do this.
on it.
Yeah. But they just now barely remembered the only mother figure that they have in their mind. And it's in that moment that they decide that that's okay to do. And you know,
they don't share any hesitancy about it. It's one thing to. Sorry, I'm going to take this out of my pocket. That might mess things up a little bit for a second. It's one thing to come to the conclusion that you need to do something after wrestling with the emotional distress of the fact that I'm going to have to kill my mom.
yes.
It's another thing to just almost show no hesitancy about it whatsoever and say, got to kill her, I guess.
Job's a job. Yeah.
That's the more what I
Yeah.
have a problem with in that orphanage flashback, is that they realize all this stuff and there's not even any kind of emotional trigger that says like, Should we really be doing this? There's no doubt. There's no hesitancy. They share none of that. They just plunge forward, and we're going to kill her. I don't think that's how they would feel
Right.
about the person who raised them.
I agree. There would be some hesitancy, and Rinoa, the one who didn't know Idea growing up, she's the one that wants to save her. There's a weird disconnect there. It doesn't jive. But I did bring up at the time that even though they had resolved that, hey, we got a job to do, we have to do our job, they weren't going to kill her. Yeah. They were going to the orphanage to find out more information.
Right.
They just happened to run into her on the way and then had to make an immediate decision.
I think
so there is still some way that it works out.
Right. If they said, we're going to try and find a way to not kill Idea, we're going to try to find a way to save her from the sorceress's power. Let's go to the orphanage and investigate or something.
Yeah.
And on the way, Idea is literally trying to kill you, and you're fighting in self-defense.
You have to.
That's different than I'm seeking you out to kill you now.
Yes. So they didn't do that. So at the very least, they weren't as resolute in their just we have to kill her even though she's our mom. But they did decide to do it still.
Yeah.
And then they just happened to run into her, and well, we got to do it now.
So same commenter. Well, actually, no. Let's actually move to the next one because that's going to probably take too long. Next one comes from Jets Duck 1. I really like the vocal Eyes on Me playing during the Ragnarok scene. As mentioned, the dialogue between the characters is in text boxes as opposed to verbalized, so it didn't clash that much with me. It was also really impressive at the time to have a vocal song playing during a game.
We didn't bring that up, did we?
Right, because it's a benefit
This
of
was
the CD-ROM.
98 or 99.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal.
It is an impressive thing.
That was a big deal. Fair enough. Good point.
Combined with the FMV's part of the reasoning why I liked FF8, seemed like such a grand movie. Most importantly, though, to me, was the storyline significance for those paying close attention. This melody had been shown to the player numerous times by then. Julia, My Mind, Waltz for the Moon, Love Grows, these are different tracks.
Yes. Yeah.
Where it has that leitmotif. But without lyrics. You know from the Delling flashback that Julia wrote the melody but was struggling for lyrics, and from the Windhill flashback that she had finally written them about Laguna. So in that very moment on the Ragnarok, you were really hearing Julia singing about Laguna for the first time. For those heavily invested, it was a pretty large payoff, and seemed as if in that moment the decreased Julia's words were finally, or the deceased Julia's words were finally reaching Laguna through their children. I thought that was an interesting perspective.
That is a very interesting. I would have liked that if we needed to do it that way, which is true. You needed to hear that song, not just in the end credits, sometime before. I still would have preferred that happen elsewhere other than right then.
Okay.
And I still, because you can still have that moment. That song is written by Julia about Laguna, and so. I think that also, we did bring this up a little bit, but that also does make it a little weird to be playing during Squall and Rinoa's, moment. This song about, other people that we know is about not the two people we're looking at. Mm-hmm. Now, I know there is a connection, but there is still, I feel like maybe we could have heard that song at some other point, maybe on the radio or something, and it would have... But then you wouldn't have heard the whole song. It needed to play for a prolonged period.
That's a good point.
So I don't know.
Tough.
And you can't have a prolonged period without text boxes. But in my head, comprehending, listening, and reading at the same time is difficult for me.
I agree that can be a problem.
Yeah.
It's not just the vocalized words clashing.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it personally, but there were people in my stream while I was playing this who were like, man, I don't like that they vocalize here too. So I think there's kind of a split on this. Some people really like it, some people don't.
Sounds like Final Fantasy
Sounds
8.
like Final Fantasy 8, right?
But that is a very good point, that it was one of the first, PS1 was the first console to be able to do this, and that song did have really intense meaning, and it's hard to fit that in anywhere else.
Yeah.
So.
What was I going to say? You almost said La Julia there.
Yes.
And I was like, you know how they do the...
Brangelina,
they combine the teams that they like.
Yes. Oh, gosh.
La Julia is a good one.
That's a good team to be
La
on.
Julia.
Team La Julia. Yeah, too bad that one didn't work out.
No, man.
Who's on team, who's Carlisle? Carlulia? Who was on team...
Caraway.
Caralulia. Who was on that team? No one. Those are the jerks. Avoid those people.
I don't know if I mentioned this. Did I mention this back on the other podcast where you remember the soldier in the red?
Yes, you did mention it. You did.
Who's like pissed that Laguna in that first flashback is talking to Julia. And he's like, I'm going to get you like sent far
deployed
away.
front lines, far away.
That guy is Caraway.
Yes, you did mention that.
There's somebody who I think it's Chocolate Rob brought that up. He thinks that that's another fan theory I like.
Hey, that's cool. but it's subtext in the game pointing to that. It's not,
Yeah. So this one is Throwaway Mcgee 1, or I keep saying 1, but it's actually just saying 1 week ago. That's not, so that wasn't Jets Duck 1, that's just Jets Duck.
Oh, so the copy paste.
And this is Throwaway Mcgee.
Cool.
I think you guys have greatly misunderstood one of the core points of the game that explains everything. Squall is a necrophiliac. He only has feelings for Rinoa when she's unconscious.
No, I wanted to bring this up. Okay.
Or when she thinks she's about to die. It's why he takes her unconscious body and heads out before anyone knows what's up. He's got plans. It's why he's got so annoyed about having to save Rinoa, who's hanging for her life. And why the developers
like he wanted her to die.
Yeah, he wants her to die. Like, why
gosh.
do you keep hanging on?
This is too much, man. This is too much.
It's why the lyrics of the song's Eyes on Me refer to a creepy dude who just keeps showing up to stare at this girl. My last night here with you, maybe yes, maybe no.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
why he's staring at her, in case it's yes. Squall isn't a vulnerable protagonist struggling with trauma and trust issues. He's a freak who's self-conscious about his freaky fetish, and this ties up to the issues you have with the game. I look forward to apology in the follow-up video.
Wow. Okay.
That was a dedicated.
That was something.
That was a dedicated joke. I tip my hat to you, Throwaway Mcgee, for going like.
He just went full, like
he
full on.
dove into the deep end with that one,
yeah.
and went all the way with it, and I commend it. Good work.
I did have to bring up this one thing, though, since he mentioned it, though. I do have to bring this up. I do, because there is a general theory amongst maybe more like feminist type women that there is this part of men that wants a woman to be silent and to not talk and to not think, right? And that it just so happens that when Rinoa's not talking or thinking, that Squall is very interested. And but that is dispelled, especially by the end, where especially that last scene with when the camcorder runs out of batteries. So it's just the cinematic, where they are actually interacting together, and he does still like her. So it's not that, but there is something there, that's interesting.
Anyways, apologize officially.
You should.
Harini Marchadi. Harini Marchadi, maybe. Interested to hear your final thoughts on Ultimecia as a villain, if you give them. I feel like she was kind of flat and bland as a villain, personally.
Well,
what did you feel about Ultimecia?
We didn't get to know her at all. We didn't know where she came from. We didn't know, other than time compression, we didn't know what she wanted, other than to just own everything. She is a flat villain, but she's not the only villain in the game.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess technically she's kind of in control of a lot of the stuff that you see. But you get to know more about all of the other villains. I mean, it's true she's flat, but you don't even know who she is until like halfway through disc 3.
Yeah, I think it's just it's a consequence of the fact that like this is a slow reveal.
Yeah.
Ultimecia is a slow reveal rather than a villain that's opposing you right from the start.
Yeah.
And so like first you think it's Galbadia, and then you think it's Idea, and Seifer's kind of mixed up in that.
Yeah.
And then it's Adel, and then it's just like it slowly leads to this reveal of this sorceress from the future. Yeah. So like, typically you want more development on your villain than this.
I'm
but
okay with
in this
though.
story, I think it's fine.
I think it's fine. And I am more than happy with the roundness to which they gave Sorceress Idea.
Yeah.
To be critical that they didn't do that same thing with Ultimecia.
Yeah.
It's fine.
I'm with you on that.
Okay.
This one comes from Aaron Ebsen. Interesting thought. In quantum mechanics, there's a theory called the many worlds theorem.
Yes.
Not an expert, but at any given moment where a decision is made, all results are possible. In the last scene of the game, Squall finds himself in the past with Idea and tells her what is to come. He tells her to create garden, to make seeds and fight the sorceress, and that the first gunblade specialist is to go on this bogus mission for timber. But he doesn't mention his name. There's no direct text, but this is how I read the scene. This creates a time loop, and the first events of the game come after the last. All these decisions were made again. All these decisions were made.
Meaning the decisions were made each time these same decisions were made again.
Okay. How do we know they would go the same way again? Seifer took the seed exam twice before Squall. He could have passed. Idea stopped a sniper bullet from 5 blocks away. Who is to say that can happen again? You can go on from there. I waited over 2 months to write this message. Thank you.
I understand the many worlds theory, but and it applies to everything. So yes, theoretically there is other worlds where this could happen. But Idea did know.
She did connect the fact that that's Squall.
Because she said, "You're the only Squall allowed in this world." She was talking to the young kid.
Yeah.
So she did know that was older adult Squall.
Yeah, she put those pieces together because Squall sees his younger self run away, and he turns to her and
he won't do nothing.
He'll come back later. He'll be fine. And she kind of sees in the subtext, wait a minute, I'm talking to the same person.
And it's clear that she knows.
She knows.
Yeah.
So there you go.
But still, but the many worlds hypothesis leads down a crazy rabbit hole that there's too many possibilities.
Yeah.
So
okay. Chibi Fox. I realize this comment is late, but I wanted to give my thoughts on what you were saying about how the player choice impacts the romance. Okay, so this is one of our female viewers who's writing this, right?
Okay.
Because we asked for feedback from women on this. I absolutely agree. There and also in the date scene in Fisherman Horizon, the way you pick the music has an impact on the way the following scene goes as well. This is not something I've ever known because I've always picked the same music every time.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know
Depending on which song you create, the scene between Squall and Rinoa ends up being different. Okay. So that's an even added element of how how the romance can be received differently, depending on which scene that you see in Fisherman's Horizon, depending on which music you picked for the players to play. Isn't that crazy?
I mean, that's cool, but I'm saying, oh man, because I might have missed something.
You're embodying why I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that stylistic choice.
I played the game 20 times before I finally ever even thought about, hey, let's have someone do tap dancing, or I can't remember what the options were.
Yeah.
Because I'm not into that.
Anyways, but yeah, with Squall, if you pick all the cold options, it really does somewhat ruin his character arc because it basically removes the development. Squall is written to go from point A to B, and we, the player, get some say in that development. Problem is, if you give him no development, then then he's not going to stay at point A. He's not going to stay at point A, even though that would feel more natural. Oh, right. He's just going to all of a sudden get to point B with no development because the player didn't choose to give him that. And for the first-time players, they might not know if or when they should make him open up, or they might just not want him to. As a girl who actually does like the romance and also likes to role-play the main character, I almost always end up playing Squall the same way. At the start, I always tend to pick the professional cold responses, but as Squall starts feeling more emotionally unstable at this point, I have him start to open up to his friends because it feels very natural. It feels like a very natural place for that growth to start. I agree with that for the most part, and I think that's probably the best way to do it. Is like when he starts, like after the Galbadia garden scene where he freaks out and like runs away and talks about not wanting to be just a memory or whatever. Right around there, kind of making a switch to picking more warm responses for Squall is probably an appropriate time to start doing that.
This is the danger of giving players choice, though. I mean, people can screw up their own playthrough without knowing it.
We have Tears of the Fallen here. Error ratio in mathematics would be a way to describe the accuracy. So he's talking about the error ratio thing. Meaning the precision will proportionally drop, causing spread to increase.
Right.
The issue here might be the translation, but I've been studying and learning mathematics for 10 years and programming software for the last 5. That would be a source code variable, but the UI would have a very different name called spread or area of effect. I suspect a translation error, but could just be a bad name. However, in terms of its real-world counterpart, it definitely exists and is accurate in its meaning. So I ended up asking for clarification on that because I was doing a little bit of preliminary research on missile guidance and stuff. So he said he found this paper here that he quotes. He says, check out optimality of error dynamics in missile guidance problems. This is probably the first result from the Google search missile guidance error. The idea behind error is the projected angle, meaning the flight path, and the projected arrival point, the impact zone. Introducing error in this will make the missiles go off course relative to the error value. So expanding the error ratio will in turn expand the radius of the impact. Imagine trying to draw a 180-degree line by hand going towards a point on a piece of paper. The error would be the percentage difference of the angle at different points along the line compiled. This can be used to calculate how far off you are from 180 degrees. This error will also show you where you're at in relation to your destination point. Say each 1.5 degree relates to a 500-meter difference on the zone or on the impact zone. That means your spread has now increased and the range of destination will be increased. In a missile guidance system, the parameters that determine the angle are much more precise than a human hand. So aside from environmental variables, I would say maybe like wind or something like that. After launch, the only way to tweak the radius is to manually select multiple points per single missile or to tweak the precision of the missiles, which is done by changing the error in the calculations.
So because they fired multiple missiles, you don't want them all to hit the exact same point.
Yeah,
you do want an error rate so that way it'll hit around a area.
So I wanted to bring this up as a counterpoint to our dismissal of this idea,
stupid.
right? That
Interesting.
That it could have a practical application.
Theoretically, when you're doing it, you may not know that there are multiple missiles, although you probably do know, because when the missiles are launched to Trabia, you do see like 5 or 6 go up.
Yeah.
So
they've launched quite a few, yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea is just that
that's fascinating.
They don't want them all to hit literally exactly the precise same point.
Exact point.
They want to spread out the impact of the missiles a little bit.
Which means by upping the error rate, you likely made it harder for the Balamb Garden to escape the radius of impact.
Correct.
So we did the wrong thing, thinking it was so stupid.
Yeah,
and
so
we were doing the right
increasing
thing.
the error rate actually increases the chance of Balamb Garden being hit.
Because it moves from the area of impact, but we widened the area of impact.
So he finishes this off by saying, so like I said, I 100% agree with you that the words error would never be used in this case for the UI, the user interface,
Right.
because what you're trying to do is increase the range of impact in that triangle. But the way to achieve that is to increase the error rate, making the missile system more imprecise, but still accurate. Precision being the closeness of the impact points, and accuracy being the relative distance from the target and the impact points. So,
Alrighty. Cool.
Great response. Thank you for that.
Well researched.
It definitely is a very valid point.
Cool.
And I think that's it. I think that was, oh no, there's a couple more. We got Ray Elric. By the way, I'm a woman. I don't like the romance, and for most women, you hit the nail on the head with why she kept at it. Think about it. Zone and what's his name calling her princess, so the Timber Owls people. Her father treating her like she's so fragile and shelf-worthy.
Yep.
Seifer liked her enough to do what he did, try to rescue her at the TV station.
He wasn't shy about him liking her.
Irvine is a flirt, but she still presumed it was because of her prowess. Squall acts like you wish, so she must have him. I think that's a very valid point.
Thank you for a response from a woman on that. That is what we suspected was the case.
Yeah. This one comes from Kikiokyo.
Kikiokyo, yeah.
As something to add, the tours around Balamb Garden with Rinoa can be completely missed if Squall decided to send her to Selfie's party with the missile base, as the second party won't return until the boss fight in Fisherman's Horizon.
With the machine.
Right. It would also seem to hurt the growth of their relationship if the player did this as well. I just loved the touches they made in having her along, though, especially that sequence in responding to Dr. Katawaki with both warm responses. In response to that comment, Fallen Wings says, it doesn't hurt the growth at all. I always send Rinoa on the other team. 1, I like having an all-girls team, and 2, the dialogue of when they meet up is super cute. You can even select Squall saying, I missed her.
Or
that
really?
He missed her. So there's kind of 2 sides to that. Like, 1, you don't get the Rinoa tour scene if you send her away, but Squall can then say, I missed you, or I was thinking about you, I had thought you died maybe.
If you selected
her to go that way. So 2 perspectives on that to consider.
That's fascinating. Wow.
One last one here from Mimic Warrior Artist. He and I have had a lot of good back and forth.
You say
over the
exchange
years.
pleasantries.
Exchanges on YouTube over the years.
Yeah.
You caught this
Today
comment
or yesterday, yeah.
on the last upload that we
Yeah.
did. Do you want to explain kind of what he was saying and give your response to that first?
Basically, it's just the beginning part. It's not the entire comment. It's mostly the beginning part, and it was in reference to you talking about the Ragnarok coming, Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
And Deus Ex Machina meaning, well, God out of the machine is technically what it means, but like something out of nothing, right? Basically, but the nothing being like the story, like the something out of just like your imagination, basically, as referring to the story writer, is the way I would refer to it this way. But you kind of mentioned, covered that all.
I tried to correct myself. It might not be like a technical Deus Ex Machina, but it's still such an unlikely thing to happen, it might as well be.
But I still think it is. I mean, you know. But basically, this comment, and what was his name again?
Mimic Warrior
Artist. Says, it does seem quite unlikely that the Ragnarok would show up right then and there. But
it's not a problem
because this story is a fantasy story.
Yeah.
Like, period. And we get this a lot, actually. We hear this from so many people.
I have seen this as a rebuttal to criticism I've made probably 100 times since I started doing YouTube videos.
But you have an interesting way of answering this, though, because you talk. I think the reason that comes up is because people use a word. The word that makes people think, oh, but it's a fantasy, is the word realistic.
Yeah, that's not realistic. That wouldn't happen.
Say that's not realistic. And then the rebuttal is, oh, it's a fantasy. Why are you expecting something realistic?
Yes.
Well, that's not what I mean by realistic. And so, Mike, you actually have a better word that you use for that. So go ahead and explain that.
There's a difference between making something realistic and making something convincing.
Convincing, that's the word.
Believable, maybe would be an alternate to that.
Sure. No. Fantasy, convincing. No. That's the word.
Here's the thing. It doesn't have to be realistic for it to happen and for me to go, oh, I buy that.
Right.
I'm convinced that would happen in this world.
Yeah.
It's not realistic in Harry Potter that they have a wizard's school.
That they can do magic. Yes.
She convinced me in the course of building that world that this happens and this is worth believing in.
Yes. It's the suspension of disbelief.
Storytelling is all setup and payoff.
Yeah.
Right? So if you don't want a story element to land as if it's a Deus Ex Machina or it comes out of nowhere or it's just this miraculous thing, it's a good idea to set it up or to explain the rules of how your world works if it's going to go contrary to what people would assume would happen, so that they can believe in it when it happens.
Exactly. It needs to be set up.
You don't have to make it realistic because it's a fantasy world, but you do have to convince me it would happen.
Yes, in your world.
It
needs to be convincing.
There is nothing in Final Fantasy VIII's world building that would make me assume that gravity is not a law, and that this
thing isn't
is
revolving,
in gravity, going around
the planet.
Those laws seem to mirror our own world.
They do appear to.
There's nothing here that suggests otherwise. So that's still incredibly unlikely to happen. Yes. I'm not convinced by the scene.
Exactly.
But that doesn't. So just saying it's fantasy so they can do whatever they want with it is, I think, kind of a mistake to make, because you were saying, try this,
Yeah. So write your own story and make a story where, well, it's fantasy, so anything can happen, and literally make anything happen. And see who buys that book. Because if there are no rules, if there are no constraints, if everything just comes out of nowhere and nothing needs to be explained and anything can happen because, quote, it's a fantasy, then, and that's your rationale behind it, then it's not going to resonate with anybody. Like, having a story that resonates with people is the reason why we tell stories. Like, resonance is like so valuable.
Yeah.
And if you're going to forego something that resonates, which means familiarity or convincing people that this could happen in your world, that's fair enough, and creating a believable world in the first place. And it doesn't mean, It doesn't mean that you can't play around with these fantasy elements.
Sure.
It doesn't mean you can't have crazy stuff happening.
Yeah.
But you need to set it up, and you need to have rules that make sense so that people can follow them. What people do when they read is oftentimes they're trying to guess what's going to happen next, you
Yeah.
know, what's going to happen next year. And if you take that away from the player by saying anything can happen, there is no possible way you're going to be able to guess what happens
Yeah.
next, because anything can happen at any point, and there is no rule against it. Then you've created a system that basically takes it's not, what's the word? There's active reading, active participation, and then there's passive.
Or passive,
you know,
yeah.
you've taken the active role away from the reader
Yeah.
by creating a system where they can't possibly anticipate anything.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm taking this to the extreme because that's not what Mimic was saying necessarily. I'm just saying that the answer that it's a fantasy, therefore it doesn't have to make sense, that is not a good response.
Yeah, I agree.
But I believe the response comes to the portrayal or the word realistic. Whenever you and I or somebody
Yes.
uses the word realistic, the assumption is, oh, these dummies don't know that they're watching a fantasy movie. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, we know we're watching a fantasy. Realistic means something, there's a disconnect. We're talking past each other. And so the word convincing, I think, is a much better word to use so that people who are inclined to believe it without much effort, right,
Yeah.
who don't need much convincing, I guess, won't have the rebuttal of it's a fantasy, it doesn't have to be realistic. It's a fantasy, it still has to be convincing.
This is the rationale behind Brandon Sanderson's hard magic that he creates for his worlds, right? Because you want the resolution to a problem to have the audience say, our characters were geniuses to
Yeah.
think to do that
Yeah.
within the confines or the rules of this
Within
world.
the rules.
I didn't think that, but now that, because I understand the rules, yes, that's completely possible.
Yeah.
And holy crap, they're geniuses for thinking of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Within the
I wouldn't
constraints.
have thought of that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
but it was
you
convincing.
want
Yes.
your audience to do when a problem is resolved. The problem here is Squall and Renoa are floating helplessly out into space,
Space is big, by the way. Space is very large.
and how on earth are they possibly going to get out of this?
Yeah.
Rather than just having a spaceship just can very conveniently show up.
If it was docked at the station before the station got
Yeah.
destroyed, and I don't know.
And somebody piloted it over to them.
Sure.
And you saw it, right? So there was a
Yeah.
whole setup to it. As you're running around inside the space station, you're looking out the window and you see this Ragnarok ship docked at the space station.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, Laguna or something. Like
Right.
when they try
Oh.
to escape, they run out and get inside of it.
What? Yeah. How did
And
Laguna?
then-
What if
and
Laguna
then they
found you?
pull over and grab you because you need to go talk to Laguna at this point
Right.
anyways, like right after this.
It makes
But
more sense.
What it would
Yeah.
what it would cause complications for, what we now have to problem solve.
We weren't supposed to know that was Laguna.
Well, you're not
first
supposed to
of
know
all.
the Laguna, but also
Yeah.
you wouldn't have the scene with Squall and Renoa being
the
alone
cockpit.
in alone. So
That's why, because I actually thought when I was trying to rationalize why Squall should have hugged her and all that,
Yeah.
I thought, well, what if the Ragnarok was piloted and then as soon as they got in it, they were imprisoned right then?
Yes.
Instead of having this whole thing.
Yes.
Well, dang it, now you miss the scene and her and the character development. Anyways.
So anyways,
would miss all
that
that.
would introduce new problems. So that's probably not the answer, right?
No.
That's not, my point is not
doesn't
that I have
mean-
in my brain right now a better
Right.
idea of how to solve this. My point is that it's not been set up. So therefore, when it happens, it feels really convenient and unsatisfying.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, that's how they get out of this?
Right. And that's
not
part
that
of the
cool.
stakes were so high to have them be resolved by just a mere happen chance. Oh, we happen to be floating right next to a thing that takes
Yeah.
us home. That is anticlimactic. Like
It's anticlimactic.
It takes these high stakes and it makes them just like fizzle out.
Yes, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
It's more about the fact that it's deflating of the high stakes
Yeah.
and it feels too convenient to be convincing than it is about like, oh, but like it's a fantasy story and we could concoct some sort of rule in which like this is made more possible or something. But you got to, if you're going to do that, you just have to explain
You just
it
have to
first.
set it up.
You
And
have
that's
to
the
set it
thing.
up.
So instead of just saying, oh, it's a fantasy and anything goes, you
Yeah.
could say it's a fantasy, therefore you should have set it up ahead of time.
Yes.
Like they had all the freedom in the world to set this up better. I know they
Yes.
mentioned the Ragnarok at some point, but like that's different from actually like creating a system or a rule whereby which this is like remotely
Well,
possible.
when you do see a scene where those Ragnaroks are
Carrying
launched and carrying Adel
Adel
up there.
up,
However,
yeah.
you don't see the scene until you talk to Laguna after the fact.
Oh, so it wasn't set up
It
ahead of
was
time.
not set up.
Oh, never mind.
It was explained afterwards that how the ship got into orbit, but it still doesn't change the fact
a problem.
that their precise location in space is in the orbit
Yeah.
of the Ragnarok at the precise moment that it comes up on them.
Yeah.
Even if it, like I think I said in the video, if it was within a mile of them and they could even just see it,
That would be miraculous. Yeah.
The fact that it actually comes in contact with them is unbelievably unlikely. Like the odds of that are insane.
Yep.
That it's not on the other side of the planet in its orbit.
Right.
That it's not in
that
an
it's at the
orbit
right
that's-
level of orbit or north-south.
that it's maybe high. What do we call? It's not higher. It's
I know,
a
'cause we're in
wider
space.
orbit or a narrower
Yeah,
orbit.
yeah.
Right.
Whether it's in low Earth gravity or- yeah.
perfectly aligned with them.
Yeah.
Might as well be impossible. It's so unlikely.
Yes. And you have to actually contend with that. You can't just say that, oh, well, Katase wrote it a fantasy and so it works. You have to actually contend with this. And Katase chose not to contend with the unlikelihood of this event. He chose not to actually give it its due, which would have actually helped with such a high stakes situation. He chose not to do it. That was a conscious choice for them to do. And the fact that the story happens to be classified in the genre of fantasy does not excuse that.
Yes, I agree 100%. So, anyways, there were many, many great comments.
Very good comments, yeah.
And there was no way I was going to be able to respond to all of them. I've tried to respond to some just in text, like there on YouTube and stuff.
Yeah.
But
The
there's
most
been great engagement.
common one that I've heard, which is funny because it is basically the reason this is what we're setting out to do.
Yeah.
But I've heard so many people say, "Wow, this really deepened my appreciation for the game." And honestly, that's like our goal. Like we want that result. Like if we can help people to deepen the appreciation of games that they already like or realize appreciate games that they didn't like before. That's awesome, and thanks for letting us know that because that is what we're trying to do, and we just so many people really like this series.
I'm really grateful that ended up being how people took it because we do criticize the game a lot.
Quite a bit,
a lot, and despite that, if people are still because that's kind of the point we're trying to make is there's a lot of things about this game that have or still do bother us.
Of course,
but underneath all of that, I think that Final Fantasy VIII is still a really great game with a lot of cool ideas and a lot of really effective moments and good storytelling.
Yes.
And there's some bad storytelling, but there's a core in the middle of it that I really appreciate myself. And I've learned to appreciate more and more over time.
It's very valuable is the way I would describe this game. This is a very valuable game to play in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So
very good.
We thank everybody for watching this 12-hour dissertation on Final Fantasy VIII. There have also been a lot of people who've commented and said, I can't believe I watched a 2.5-hour video about Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah, and then they
Much
say,
less
when's the next one?
And again and again. But
hey, we're going to do this for a lot of different games.
Yeah,
So
we are stoked about this format. We're glad that you guys are liking it.
Yeah.
And if you would like to vote on the next one that we cover, hit us up on Patreon or on Subscribestar. Either place, you'll be able to do that. And we're looking forward to the next one. Okay, till then, we'll see you at the end of April. Peace out, everybody.
whatever.